Hey friends. Glad you're here at Revenger. What if we've cooked up something special? What if Naruto joined the Night's Watch and his Bijuu mode destroyed the wall of ice in one punch? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Wrong Side of the Wall. The cold hit him like a wall before the actual wall did. Naruto had been in plenty of bad situations, swallowed by giant snakes, pulled into other dimensions, punched through mountains, dragged to the bottom of oceans, but he'd never experienced cold like this. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was the kind that reached through your skin and grabbed your bones directly, like the air itself had a personal problem with you being alive. He sat up in the snow, spat out a mouthful of it, and looked around. Trees. Dense, black-barked, leafless trees stretching in every direction like broken fingers pointing at a sky so gray it looked like wet stone. Snow everywhere. Wind that didn't gust so much as press, a constant grinding pressure from the north that smelled like nothing, not pine, not earth, not moisture. Just absence. The smell of a place where things stopped. Kurama, he said out loud, his breath fogging thick in the air. You alive in there? Define alive, the fox replied, his voice rumbling through Naruto's chest like a distant earthquake. I am present. I am deeply unimpressed. What did you do? The ceiling array, it must have gone sideways when Gaara's sand destabilized the outer ring. I felt the dimension tear before I could, I know what happened. That was a rhetorical expression of displeasure. A pause. We are not in the elemental nations. Yeah. Naruto stood up, brushing snow off his orange jacket, already soaked through, already stiffening at the edges. He'd need to run chakra through his clothes soon or hypothermia would become a genuine consideration, even for him. He turned a slow circle, scanning. I'm getting absolutely nothing on my Sage Mode sensors. No familiar chakra signatures. The natural energy here feels. He reached out, tasting it. Ancient. Thick. Like it hasn't been touched in a very long time. It hasn't been shaped, Kurama said, with something approaching wonder in his voice. Nobody here has ever used it. It's just sitting there. Raw. Another pause, this one longer. There is something else, though. To the north. Naruto had already felt it. He'd felt it the moment he'd sat up and oriented himself. It sat at the edge of his Sage Mode perception like a cold spot in a warm bath, not a chakra signature, exactly. More like the absence of one. A place where natural energy went and didn't come back. Several places. Moving. Moving toward him. How many? He asked quietly, already sliding into a ready stance. More than you want to count. Less than you can't handle. Kurama's tone sharpened. They are not alive, Naruto. I figured. He'd never sensed anything like it, no life force, no heat of emotion, none of the buzzing complexity that even the most ruthless human being carried in their chakra. Whatever was coming through those trees was animate without being alive. Moving without wanting to. Present without being there. The first one came out of the trees 20 meters to his left. It had been a man, once. It still wore the shape of one, 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, but the resemblance ended there. The skin was gray-blue, stretched tight over the skull like it had been soaked and then dried in the wrong shape. One eye was missing, the socket packed with frost. The remaining eye was blue. Not the blue of sky or water or even ice, a blue that seemed to generate its own cold light, like a cracked lantern filled with winter. 3 more emerged behind it. Then 5. Then a dozen, spreading in a loose semicircle through the tree line, moving with that horrible jerky efficiency of things that didn't feel pain or fatigue or doubt. Naruto exhaled slowly through his nose. Zombies, he said. I've been dropped into a world with zombies. To be precise, Kurama said, I believe the correct term is shambling corpses animated by some external force that I cannot yet identify. But yes. Effectively. You're hilarious. He cracked his knuckles. Okay. Let's figure out what kills them. The nearest wight lunged. Naruto sidestepped it without fully committing, let it stumble past, and hit it in the spine with an open palm strike, enough force to knock a bear flat. The wight stumbled, skidded 10 feet through the snow, and immediately started getting back up. Durable, he noted. Try fire. He formed the hand sign in a quarter second and breathed out a cone of fire that washed over the nearest cluster of 3 wights. 2 of them ignited properly, collapsed into burning heaps, and didn't get back up. The third had one arm on fire and seemed to not care, still lurching forward. Fire mostly works, he said, stepping to the right to avoid a swipe from a wight that had circled around. He grabbed its arm, pivoted, used its own momentum to slam it into 2 others, and then set all 3 alight in one sustained breath. How's the perimeter looking? They're converging from the north and northeast. I count approximately 60. Also, Kurama's voice went very level in a way that meant he was being deliberately calm so Naruto wouldn't panic. There are 4 signatures mixed in among the dead ones that are categorically different. Colder. Much more ordered. Whatever they are directing the others. Show me. The fox's perception overlaid with his own, and Naruto saw them, for tall, pale shapes moving with a precision that none of the wights possessed, hanging back at the edge of the tree line, watching. They moved like generals. Patient. Intelligent. One raised a hand. The 60-odd wights rushed him at once. Naruto went shadow clone immediately, not 1 or 2, but 30, flooding the clearing with orange-clad copies of himself, each one carrying enough chakra to fight independently for a solid 2 minutes. The wights hit the clone formation like a wave hitting rocks. Some clones went down immediately. Wights were strong, surprisingly strong, and they fought without self-preservation instinct, which made them unpredictable, but the clones that went down took 3, 4, 5 wights each, burning them, slamming them apart, using the environment. The real Naruto was already moving. He ran straight at the tree line, straight at the 4 cold figures who stood watching, because he'd learned something early in his career. When you didn't know what something was, the fastest way to find out was to go punch it. The nearest one turned to face him as he crossed the tree line. Up close it was extraordinary, tall as a man but wrong in every proportion, armored in something that looked like black ice, with skin so pale it was almost translucent and eyes that matched the wights exactly but carried something behind them that the wights utterly lacked. Thought. Ancient, cold, absolute thought. It raised one hand and the temperature dropped another 15 degrees in an instant. A spear of ice formed in its palm from nothing, crystallizing out of the air itself, and it threw it with a speed that would have impressed even a jonin. Naruto caught it. He caught it between 2 fingers, let it dissolve the frost around his hand, and looked at the creature with honest curiosity. Okay, that was actually impressive, he said. What are you? The creature stared at him. Right. Probably not the talking type. He crushed the ice spear in his fist and felt the cold trying to climb his arm, not just temperature, but something else, something that wanted to propagate, to spread and still in silence. He flooded his hand with Kurama's chakra instinctively, the golden-red heat burning the spreading cold away. The creature's expression, blank as it was, shifted fractionally, something registered in those blue eyes. Surprise, maybe. Recalculation. Then it called the other 3 and all 4 of them attacked simultaneously. Naruto moved into chakra mode, the golden cloak racing over his skin, the black marks of his seal appearing at his joints, his speed jumping into the range where the landscape became a blur, and the fight became something it hadn't been before. The White Walkers were fast, genuinely fast, moving with a liquid precision that reminded him uncomfortably of the Raikage, but they were operating on physical rules that he'd already absorbed and surpassed. He was faster. His durability was beyond anything their ice weapons could immediately overcome. And the Kurama chakra burning in his skin wasn't just warmth, it was actively hostile to whatever cold principle animated them. One crumbled where his fist connected. Not broke, crumbled, the blue light dying in its eyes as the body simply came apart into frost. The second he caught by the throat, let the chakra flare, watched it dissolve. The third and fourth looked at each other, an actual exchange of looks, a communication happening between them that chilled him more than the temperature, and then retreated north at a run, melting into the dark tree-line. He let them go. Turned back. His shadow clones had finished the wights, the clearing now scattered with smoldering black shapes. The last clones were dispersing in puffs of smoke, their memories flooding back into him, 63 wights total, durable but manageable, weak to fire, regenerative unless the burns were thorough. He stood in the middle of the destroyed clearing, chest barely moving, steam rising from the chakra cloak as it faded back. They retreated, he said. The smart ones retreated. They recognized an unknown variable, Kurama said, and there was something in his voice, not quite respect, not quite worry, but somewhere between the two. They weren't afraid. Whatever they are, they do not feel fear. They simply recalculated and withdrew. That makes them more dangerous than anything that runs from you. I know. Naruto looked north, toward the dark between the trees, where the two remaining walkers had disappeared. There are more of them. Many more. And whatever commands them, something commands them, Naruto, something above those four, is very, very far north. And very, very old. Kurama paused. We should find out where we are. Yeah. Naruto looked south, because south was where the natural energy felt slightly less dead, where the wind eased fractionally, where something at the edge of his perception registered as warm and alive. He expanded his sage mode fully, pushing his awareness out in a vast circle, and found them, a group of maybe 20 humans, roughly 5 kilometers south and west, moving at a pace that suggested either urgency or fear. Some of them were on horses. All of them were alive. He also found, directly south, something monumental. A concentration of worked stone so vast it registered like a mountain, rising out of the landscape with a permanence that spoke of centuries. And above the stone, ice. Hundreds and hundreds of meters of it. He'd find the humans first. He ran south through the trees, moving fast enough that the branches blurred, navigating by Sage Mode's living map. The humans were moving on what passed for a road, a crude track beaten through the forest floor, packed hard enough to carry horses. He paced them from inside the tree-line for 30 seconds, reading them. 22 individuals. 19 in some kind of uniform, dark cloaks, black leather, armed with swords and spears, nothing that a mid-level genin would find threatening. 3 others in rougher clothing, moving with the wary efficiency of people who spent a lot of time outdoors. They were scared. Their heart rates were elevated. They kept looking north. He stepped out of the trees onto the road directly in front of them. The column stopped with a chorus of alarmed shouts. Swords came out. Spears leveled. Torches swung toward him. He stood in the middle of the road with his hands slightly raised, not surrendering, just showing empty palms, and looked at them. They looked back. He took in the details in about 2 seconds, medieval, clearly. Iron weapons, not steel of any particular quality. The black cloaks looked old, patched, worn by people who didn't have anything else. Hard faces, these weren't city guards or pampered soldiers. These were men who'd been cold and hungry and frightened for so long it had just become the texture of their lives. Behind them, 3 men in different clothing, ranging scouts, maybe. And at the front, a heavy-set older man on a black horse, gray-bearded, with eyes like chips of dark flint, staring at Naruto with an expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite recognition. It was assessment. "Who are you?" the old man said. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd been obeyed for a very long time. "Naruto Uzumaki," Naruto replied. He considered adding something more explanatory and decided against it. He could explain his entire situation and these people would understand approximately 0 of it. "I just killed a bunch of dead things in the forest about 5 kilometers north of you. 2 of the cold ones got away." Complete silence. A horse shifted and blew out a nervous breath. You killed a ranging party of wights, the old man said slowly. Alone. And 4 of the tall ones. White ones. 2 escaped. He paused. What are they called? More silence. One of the younger soldiers, a lean young man near the front, dark-haired, gray eyes, carrying a sword that looked better cared for than the rest of him, was staring at Naruto with an expression caught somewhere between disbelief and raw curiosity. There was a large black dire wolf sitting pressed against his leg that was staring at Naruto with considerably less ambivalence. The wolf wasn't growling. It was just looking at him with the focused, measuring attention of an animal that was smarter than most people in the vicinity. White Walkers, the young man with the dire wolf said. His voice was careful, like he was offering the name experimentally, waiting to see how it landed. White Walkers, Naruto repeated. And the dead ones? Wights. The young man paused. You said you killed them alone. 2 White Walkers and 63 wights, yeah. The fire works on the wights. What kills the walkers permanently? He looked at the old man. The 2 I crumbled with my hands. I was running chakra through the strike, which I'd guess worked because of the heat, but if there's something specific, dragonglass, the old man said, and his voice had shifted now. The authority was still there but something else had come into it. Not quite awe, men like this didn't do awe easily, but a kind of deep, concentrated attention. Obsidian. It unmakes them. Good to know. Naruto nodded. Are you heading to that wall? South of here. Castle Black, the young man confirmed. Yes. Then let's go together. He looked north again, feeling the dead space between the trees. There'll be more coming. The 2 that got away will report back to something and it'll send more. Report back, the old man repeated. He had the controlled expression of a man who wanted to ask 100 questions and was disciplining himself to ask none of them until he'd assessed the situation more thoroughly. You speak as if they communicate deliberately. They do. The White Walkers do, anyway. Naruto fell into step beside the column without being invited. The ones I killed, they moved like they were receiving orders. And when 2 of them looked at each other before retreating, they made a decision together. That's not animal behavior. That's tactical intelligence. The column started moving again, mostly because the old man gave a small nod and touched his horse forward. The men kept the swords out. Naruto didn't comment on it. The young man with the dire wolf fell into step beside him. The wolf maintained about 3 feet of distance and kept watching Naruto's hands. Jon Snow, the young man said. Naruto Uzumaki. You're not from here. It wasn't a question. No. He looked sideways at Jon. Up close the similarity he'd noticed from a distance, the weight behind the eyes, the set of the jaw, the quality of quiet watchfulness, was sharper. This was a young man who carried something heavy and had been carrying it so long he didn't remember what it was like to set it down. How obvious is it? Jon looked at Naruto's orange jacket, the Konoha headband still somehow fastened at his waist, the whisker marks on his cheeks, and then back at his face. Somewhat obvious. Fair. They walked for a moment. The trees moved on either side. The big man on the horse, who is he? Lord Commander Mormont. He leads the Night's Watch. Jon paused. We're the Night's Watch. The people who guard the wall. Yes. How long has that wall been there? Jon glanced at him sidelong, recalibrating something. 8,000 years. Maybe more. 8,000 years. Naruto let that sit for a moment. In his world, the oldest things, the Sage of 6 Paths, the tailed beasts themselves, stretched back 1,000 years, maybe 2,000. 8,000 was a different kind of number. It was a number that meant the problem it had been built to solve was not new. It was not contained. It was simply being held. And in 8,000 years, he said, the White Walkers have never actually broken through. There was one long night. Thousands of years ago. Jon's voice was careful. They came south then. It was stopped. We don't fully know how. But now they're building again. Yes. And how many men do you have at Castle Black? Jon was quiet for a moment. 100. Perhaps less. 100 men and an 8,000-year-old wall of ice standing between this world and an army of the dead led by intelligent, ancient beings of supernatural cold. Naruto thought about that. He thought about it for about 2 seconds, and then something settled in him, not the heavy weight of obligation but the lighter, cleaner feeling of purpose clicking into place. He'd felt it before, in front of Pain's invasion, standing at the Valley of the End, at the start of the Fourth Great Ninja War. The feeling that said, this is the fight. Took you long enough, Kurama said, with a warmth that was slightly too dry to be affectionate and slightly too gentle to be sarcastic. Shut up, Naruto murmured. Jon glanced at him. Sorry. Thinking out loud. The wall came into view through the trees about an hour later, and Naruto stopped walking. He'd sensed it earlier, the vast concentration of worked stone and ancient ice, but sensing it and seeing it were entirely different things. It rose against the gray sky like it had always been there, like it was a geographical feature rather than something made by hands. 700 feet. Maybe more. He craned his neck. The top was lost in low cloud. The ice face caught what little gray light the sky offered and threw it back in fractured planes, giving the whole structure a cold luminescence. It was enormous. It was ancient. It was, from an objective standpoint, impressive as hell. That's a wall, he said. Jon had stopped beside him. Yes. We have walls in my world. Big ones. That is significantly bigger than our walls. It goes from sea to sea, Jon said, and there was something in his voice, not pride exactly, more like the complicated feeling of a person who was both awed by a thing and trapped by it. 300 miles. Kurama made a sound inside Naruto's chest that wasn't quite a laugh. If it makes these people feel safe, the logic is understandable. Unfortunately, anything large enough to build a wall that size has also, presumably, considered how to get over it. They go around the sea ends? Naruto asked. Jon looked at him. That's the fear, yes. Eventually. He studied the wall for another few seconds, then started walking again. The gate at the base was a narrow tunnel through the ice, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. They passed through it in single file, Naruto's Sage Mode sweeping the passage automatically, old ice, dense and uniform, with that ancient chakra-adjacent energy threading through it. Not natural ice entirely. Something had gone into its construction that went beyond engineering. He filed that away. Castle Black, on the south side of the wall, was less castle and more collection of survival. Stone buildings connected by covered walkways, most of them showing their age in crumbling mortar and patched roofs. The courtyard was swept and organized, weapons racked neatly, horses stabled, maintained by people who understood that order was itself a kind of defense. But the walls were thin. The gate was small. If a real army, a human one, politics and all, came at this place, it would fall in an afternoon. Against the dead, it was a symbol. Not a fortification. Men stopped what they were doing when the column came through. Word spread visibly, passing from man to man across the yard, and the spread of it had a very specific shape. They weren't whispering about the return of the Lord Commander, or about wights in the forest. They were looking at Naruto. He was used to people staring at him. He'd been stared at since before he was old enough to understand why. He met every gaze that found him without blinking, with the relaxed self-possession of a person who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. An older man in a maester's chain appeared from one of the towers, stout, gray-haired, with kind eyes behind a layer of wariness. A bald man nearby had the look of someone who'd been a soldier for so long it was now just his natural shape. Mormont dismounted and handed his horse off without looking at it, already moving toward Naruto with that same contained, evaluative attention he'd maintained for the entire march. "Walk with me," Mormont said. It was not a request. They walked to a room off the main hall, small, firelit, the table scattered with maps and letters. Mormont closed the door. Jon had followed, which Mormont permitted with a single glance. The old man sat down, poured himself something from a clay jug, didn't pour Naruto anything, and looked at him. "Tell me what you are," he said. "A shinobi," Naruto said. "A ninja, in your terminology, though our ninjas are probably different from whatever stories you might have about ninjas. I use chakra, energy derived from physical and spiritual sources, to augment my body and perform techniques. I'm also a jinchuriki. A person with a large entity sealed inside them." He paused, deciding how to handle this part. "A very large entity. Specifically the nine-tailed fox. We work together. I'm not possessed, we're partners. It means my physical capabilities, durability, and healing are significantly beyond a normal person's." Mormont was very still. "How significantly?" "I've survived things that should have killed me several times over. I don't tire easily. I heal from most injuries in minutes. In my full combat form," he considered, "I would be the most powerful thing on the battlefield, I think. Including the White Walkers." "Including?" "Yes." Mormont looked at Jon. Jon, to his credit, looked back with the expression of someone who had also fought beside Naruto for an entire march, sensed something about him, and arrived at essentially the same conclusion with somewhat less surprise. "You're not lying," Mormont said. "Not a question. An assessment." "No. Men who are that powerful generally want something for it." "I want to understand where I am and how to get home," Naruto said simply. "And while I'm figuring that out, I'm going to help. Because that's what I do." He met Mormont's eyes directly. "I'm not bargaining. I'm not building leverage. The dead things are a problem and I can fight them. Those two things together are self-evident to me." Mormont was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, men were talking, the low murmur of a military establishment going about its evening routine. "How old are you?" Mormont asked finally. 17. Jon made a small sound. Mormont's face didn't change, but something passed through his eyes. He drank from his cup, set it down, and looked at the maps on his table. "You'll sleep in the barracks tonight. We'll talk more in the morning." "Jon," he glanced up. "Show him where things are. And Naruto." He waited until Naruto was looking at him. "Don't wander north of the wall tonight." "I don't make promises I might have to break," Naruto said pleasantly. Mormont stared at him. Then, slowly, something that wasn't quite a smile moved the corner of his mouth. "Get out of my office." The barracks were cold, functional, smelling of sweat and iron and old wool. Jon gave him the tour with economical precision: mess hall, armory, training yard, the lift that ran to the top of the wall. Men watched from doorways and corners with the mix of suspicion and hunger that Naruto recognized, people who were frightened, who'd been frightened for a long time, encountering something that might, possibly, be on their side. "Ghost likes you," Jon said as they crossed the yard. The white dire wolf, Ghost, apparently, had followed them from the moment they'd left Mormont's office and was now padding silently beside Naruto. Animals usually do. He reached down and scratched behind Ghost's ears. The wolf's eyes closed in what could only be satisfaction. "Is it unusual for him?" "Very." Jon watched Ghost for a moment. "He doesn't like most people. Even people he knows. Smart animal." Naruto stood in the center of the yard and looked up at the wall, the top of it lost in darkness now, the night having closed in while they were inside. Stars were visible where the cloud broke, different stars than he knew, arranged in patterns he'd never learned. "Jon." Two White Walkers went north tonight to report back. Whatever they reported to is going to send a response. He looked sideways. How long do we have before the next attack, historically? Jon's expression was troubled. They've been growing bolder. Ranging parties going missing more frequently. He stopped. Started again. We don't really have a reliable pattern. It's been building for years and nobody in the south will listen to us and we have 100 men and, he cut himself off again, jaw tight. Hey. Jon looked at him. I'm not asking so I can calculate odds. I'm asking so I know how much sleep I need tonight. He grinned, the genuine, slightly ridiculous grin that had irritated and disarmed better enemies than Jon Snow. I'll take watch. North side. Jon stared at him. You've got 100 men, Naruto continued. You can't afford to lose any of them to something I can prevent while they're sleeping. Makes sense, right? You'd stand watch alone. On top of the wall. All night. I don't need much sleep. And, he looked north, where the darkness pressed against the far side of the ice. Something's coming. Not tonight, maybe. But soon. And I'd rather be up there when it does. Jon was quiet for a moment, looking at this person who had appeared in his world from nowhere, destroyed a white army without apparent effort, answered Mormont's interrogation without flinching, and was now proposing to spend the night standing guard on top of one of the largest structures in the world because it was the logical thing to do. You're not what I expected when the Lord Commander said we had a visitor, Jon said finally. What did you expect? Something that needed more help than it could give. Naruto laughed, a short, genuine sound that the cold and the dark swallowed quickly. Go sleep, Jon Snow. Tell Mormont I'll make a full report in the morning. He turned toward the lift. And if you hear something large and orange happening north of the wall sometime around midnight, don't worry about it. He rode the lift up alone, the ropes creaking, the ice face sliding past him in slow gray planes. At the top, the wind was something else entirely, not the pressing cold of the forest but a full, horizontal assault, the kind of wind that came from thousands of miles of unobstructed nothing. He walked to the northern edge and looked out. Dark. Beyond dark. A darkness so total that it had texture, had weight. He could see nothing but he could sense, at the extreme edge of his Sage Mode, the faint scattered signatures of the dead moving out there in the trees, circling, probing. Waiting. He sat on the edge of the wall with his legs dangling 700 feet above the northern forest and let Sage Mode run passively, watching for those telltale cold absences in the natural energy that meant something dead was moving. You're being unusually contemplative, Kurama observed. 8,000 years, Kurama. He looked at the darkness. They built this thing 8,000 years ago and the problem is still here. Still coming. Problems like this one don't get solved in one night, the fox said. Or one war. You know that. Yeah. He exhaled, his breath streaming south in the wind. I know that. He paused. But they do get solved. Eventually. Always eventually. He let the Sage Mode spread wider, broader, reaching out as far as it would go. The two White Walkers that had escaped him were there, north, distant, moving with a direction and purpose that confirmed what Kurama had said. They were reporting. Something was listening. Something very old. Very patient. Very far north. He looked at it in his perception, not a shape, not a form, but a concentration of that dead cold so profound that the natural energy around it had simply given up and gone silent. Like a wound in the world. And from that wound, slowly, with the terrifying patience of something that had been waiting for thousands of years and didn't mind waiting thousands more, purpose was extending southward. Naruto watched it for a long time. We're going to have a conversation eventually, he told the darkness. You and me. The wind answered. Nothing else did. Below him, Castle Black settled into its uneasy night. Men slept in cold barracks and dreamed of warmer places. Horses stamped in their stalls. The fire in Mormont's window burned steadily, because the Lord Commander was a man who didn't sleep much either. And on top of the wall, in a world that had forgotten what hope tasted like, a 17-year-old boy from another dimension sat with his legs dangling over the edge of the oldest barrier in human history and watched the dark with gold-flecked blue eyes, feeling the shape of a war that had been waiting longer than any living thing could remember. He reached into the natural energy of this old, strange world and gathered it around him, feeling it respond, slowly at first, like something waking from a very long sleep, but responding. He hadn't used Sage Mode for more than 6 months. He hadn't needed to. But here, in a world where nobody else had ever touched this energy, it answered him with a kind of startled generosity, pouring in faster than he'd expected. He sat in Sage Mode on top of the world's oldest wall and watched and waited and did not move, and the cold came off the north in sheets, and it broke against him like it broke against the ice. Ghost appeared beside him an hour later. Jon had let the dire wolf out, apparently, or Ghost had decided on his own. The wolf sat next to Naruto, enormous and white and silent, staring north with his red eyes. "You feel it too," Naruto said. Ghost pressed against his side. "Not asking for warmth. Offering it." Naruto put one hand on the wolf's back and watched the dark, and nothing attacked that night, and in the morning when the sun came up gray and reluctant over the eastern hills and the wall threw its shadow long across the southern snow, Naruto was still sitting there, Sage Mode full and burning, ready. He was in this world now. Whatever that meant, he was in it. Chapter 2, Black Cloaks and Old Ghosts. The mess hall at Castle Black held maybe 60 men at capacity and smelled permanently of boiled grain, old smoke, and the particular collective exhaustion of people who ate the same bad food in the same cold room every day without complaint because complaining required energy they didn't have. Naruto walked in the next morning and ate enough for 8 of them. He wasn't being dramatic about it. He genuinely needed the calories. 12 hours of sustained Sage Mode, even passive Sage Mode, burned through his reserves at a rate that would have alarmed a medical ninja. He went through 4 bowls of gray porridge, a full loaf of black bread, a plate of salted something that might have been fish or might have been something that had merely met fish once, and then looked around for more. The 60 men in the mess hall watched him with the collective expression of people witnessing a natural disaster they couldn't classify. "Is there more?" he asked the serving man. The serving man stared at him. "More food. The porridge. More of it. That was everyone's second portion, my lord." "I'm not a lord." He looked at the empty pot. "Thought about it. Sorry. I'll figure out a solution for this." He sat back on the bench with the quiet satisfaction of someone who was still hungry but choosing not to make it a problem, and that's when Jon Snow sat down across from him with a cup of something hot and the look of a person who had spent the night thinking about a conversation and was now ready to have it. "You were up there all night," Jon said. "Nothing came. 2 walkers are moving northeast now, deeper into the forest. The main concentration of dead is staying north. There's some kind of gathering happening up there that I can't fully read at this distance, but it's slow. We have time." He pulled the bread apart, eating mechanically. "Mormont has his morning meeting soon." "An hour." Jon looked at him over the cup. "The men are talking about you. They're always talking." "What are they saying?" "Half of them think you're a deserter from some southern army who's lost his mind and wandered north. The other half think Tormund Giantsbane somehow shaved and changed his hair." He paused. "PYP is saying you're a wildling of some kind. Gren thinks you might be a ghost. What do you think?" Jon was quiet for a moment, doing that careful, deliberate thing with his words that Naruto had already identified as characteristic. Jon Snow didn't speak without thinking. It wasn't caution, it was precision. He actually cared whether what he said was true. "I think you're exactly what you said you were. Someone from somewhere we don't know, with abilities we don't understand, who ended up north of the wall and killed 60 wights." He paused. "And I think the Lord Commander is trying to decide whether to trust you, use you, or fear you. He should choose trust. It's more efficient. Most powerful things I've encountered, Jon said carefully, aren't interested in being efficient. Naruto looked at him. I lived in a village for most of my life where the most powerful person around was also the most accessible. Sat at a ramen stand and ate with regular people. Knew everyone's name. He shrugged. Power that makes itself distant is power that's compensating for something. Jon stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite surprise, more like recognition of an argument he'd been having with himself for a long time, finally hearing a clean answer. He looked down at his cup. Where you come from? Is it better than here? It's different kinds of hard. Naruto thought about it honestly. We have wars. We have people who want power and hurt others to get it. We have people who are born with nothing and told they deserve nothing. He paused. But there's also, the system works, sometimes. People who start with nothing can matter. Can lead. He said it simply, without performance. Jon heard exactly what Naruto wasn't saying about himself and chose not to push it. That restraint, Naruto thought, was one of the better things about Jon Snow. They sat in companionable quiet for a moment. The mess hall emptied gradually, men heading to their duties. Someone had stoked the fire higher and the room had achieved the rare castle black status of almost warm. I need to understand this world, Naruto said finally. Everything. The politics, the geography, who the players are. Can you do that? It's complicated. I've absorbed the complete tactical knowledge of 100 shadow clones simultaneously. I can handle complicated. Jon blinked at that. Decided not to ask. Tonight, then. After the meeting. Mormont's morning meeting was held in the same map-scattered room, but this time it was populated. The senior officers of Castle Black arranged around the table with the wary, slightly competitive energy of men who'd been in the same small place together for too long. The first ranger, Benjen Stark, Jon's uncle, Naruto had gathered from the quiet way Jon's expression changed when he mentioned the name, though Benjen was currently somewhere north of the wall and had been for months, was absent. In his place, a man called Thorn ran the rangers, lean, dark, with the face of someone who'd been angry for so long the expression had simply calcified. Thorn looked at Naruto the way a man looks at something he's already decided about. A boy, he said, when Mormont introduced him. You're proposing to brief us on the enemy based on the account of a boy in a ridiculous orange, Ser Alisar, Mormont said, with the specific tone of a man deploying a name as a warning. Thorn subsided. But his eyes stayed on Naruto, sharp and dismissive, cataloging. Naruto gave him a mild look back and said nothing. He'd deal with Thorn when Thorn became relevant. Right now there were more important things. He laid out what he'd sensed, the white formations, the walker behavior, the gathering to the north, in clean, precise language, the way he'd learned to brief Tsunade after a mission. No editorializing. Just what he observed and what he could reasonably infer. Mormont listened without interrupting. The other officers shifted in various degrees of discomfort. You said they communicate, said a heavy-set man named Bowen Marsh, the Lord Steward, who had the look of someone who managed crises through paperwork. The White Walkers. Deliberately. Yes. That contradicts everything we believe about them. Then your beliefs are out of date. He said it gently, not with contempt. They retreated tactically. They assessed me as a threat they didn't have data on and withdrew rather than continuing a losing engagement. That's not instinct. That's command reasoning. He looked at Mormont. Whatever their intelligence is, and it is genuine intelligence, they're adapting to new information. Which means they'll adapt to me. Which means, Mormont said quietly, the value of surprise has a time limit. Yes. Weeks, maybe. They're patient. They'll observe before they commit again. Weeks, Thorn said, with a short sound that was technically a laugh. In weeks we might have 60 men. We might have less. Half the watch is all ready, he stopped. Already what? Naruto asked. Mormont answered for him, with the candor of a man who decided that honesty was more useful than pride. Deserting. Defecting. The watch is a shadow of what it was. We cannot hold this wall with what we have, we could barely hold it with 10 times the number. He met Naruto's eyes. Which is the context in which your arrival is either the most convenient thing that has happened to the Night's Watch in a generation, or an elaborate trap of a kind we don't have the framework to understand. If it's a trap, Naruto said, it's the most convoluted one in history. I was attending a joint mission in another dimension entirely. He paused. I know you can't verify that. I'm also not asking you to trust me on faith. Watch what I do. That's what I've always worked with. Mormont studied him. Around the table, the officers had the looks of men watching a chess game they didn't quite understand. There's a village, Mormont said finally. Mole's Town. 2 hours south. Rumors have reached us of dead walking near their outlying farms. 3 families have disappeared. He folded his hands on the table. I was going to send a ranging party. I'll go, Naruto said. I'll take 5 men. You can take them if it makes people feel better. They won't be necessary. Thorn made a sound. Naruto looked at him for the first time with his full attention, and Thorn, who was not a coward, who had survived the wall and the watch and the brutal political machinery of Westeros, stopped making sounds. Is there something useful you want to add? Naruto asked. His voice was perfectly pleasant. Thorn said nothing. Then let's be efficient with the meeting time. He looked back at Mormont. The Lord Commander had a look on his face that, if you knew him, might have been satisfaction. Training happened the way it always did at Castle Black, without much enthusiasm and with even less equipment. The yard was packed dirt gone rock hard with frost, the weapon racks holding swords and spears of varying quality, and the men who drilled there were going through forms with the resigned efficiency of people who understood that training was necessary but hadn't believed in any particular outcome for quite some time. Naruto stood at the edge of the yard for about 10 minutes and watched. The technique was not bad, in the way that a thing can be not bad and also nowhere close to good. They fought like men who'd been taught to fight by other men who'd been taught to fight, the forms crystallized over generations into something safe and repeatable and deeply vulnerable to anyone who'd actually thought about combat. No combination work. No switching between ranges. Every exchange went to swords immediately, no setup, no misdirection. Against humans with similar training, fine. Against the dead, who felt nothing and adapted nothing and just kept coming, suicidal. Jon was in the yard, sparring with a dark-skinned young man who moved better than most. The friend, Sam Tarly, Naruto had learned at breakfast, a round-faced, soft-spoken man who looked like he'd been born for libraries rather than sword practice and had been sorted incorrectly, was sitting on a bench nearby with a very large book, watching the sparring with the politely pained expression of someone who understood what he was watching in theory. Jon, Naruto called. Jon stopped mid-form. His sparring partner stepped back. Everyone in the yard looked. Come at me. Jon looked at him. I have a sword. That's fine. Naruto settled into a loose stance, hands at his sides. Come at me properly. Don't hold back. The yard went quiet. Jon sheathed a look at Naruto, at his sword, at the lack of any weapon in Naruto's hands, and then something decided behind his eyes. He came. He was good. He was actually genuinely good, fast, measured, economical with his movements, not telegraphing. He committed to the attack without overextending, which a lot of the men didn't manage. The sword came in at an angle that would have opened Naruto's shoulder if Naruto had been a normal person standing still. Naruto sidestepped by 4 inches, let the blade pass his ear, caught Jon's sword arm by the wrist, and redirected the momentum so that Jon's own movement carried him into a controlled stumble that Naruto guided rather than used to throw. He released Jon before he hit the ground. Jon recovered, turned, came again, faster this time, adapting, testing. Good. Naruto let him work through a full combination, blocking each strike with his forearms and open palms, moving just enough to keep the blade from connecting, not so much that he looked like he was running. He could feel the yard watching. Could feel the specific attention of men who were calibrating. "You're planting your left foot before you change direction," Naruto said, between a sword cut and a thrust. "Anyone who's watching for it knows where you're going." Jon didn't respond, but his next change of direction was different. He'd heard it and applied it in real time, which was impressive. Naruto rewarded that by actually having to move properly for the first time. He slapped the blade wide with one hand and used the heel of his other palm to tap Jon in the chest, hard enough to be felt, not hard enough to do anything. Jon stopped. He was breathing hard. Naruto wasn't. "You're good," Naruto said, meaning it. "You'd beat anyone in this yard." Jon glanced around, recalibrating. "But not you. Not yet." He turned to the yard generally. Men were standing very still, which meant they were paying close attention. Everything you're doing is built around the assumption that what you're fighting has a sense of self-preservation. It hesitates. It protects itself. It can be frightened. He looked around. The dead don't do any of that. You need to fight differently. "Can someone bring me a spear?" Someone handed him one. He held it loosely and looked at the nearest man, a big, slightly bewildered young man called Gren, whose size suggested he'd been hitting things with practice swords since he was 4 and whose technique suggested he'd been taught by someone who wasn't much better than him. "Wights are strong," Naruto said. "Stronger than they should be. They don't care about pain. They don't stop unless you burn them thoroughly or you take them apart." He planted the spear in the ground. "So you need to create distance, create fire, and stop thinking about this as a sword fight. It's pest control." He looked at Gren. "Hit me with your sword." Gren blinked. Swung. Naruto stepped inside the swing, used his left hand on Gren's forearm to lock the sword angle down, used his right elbow against Gren's chest to push him back, and in the space that created, raked the spear in a short arc at knee height. Against a wight, the legs would have come off. Gren stumbled back uninjured, eyes wide. "See?" Naruto handed the spear back. "Create the gap, take the piece. You're not trying to kill something. You're trying to stop it moving toward you." He looked at Mormont, who had apparently come down from somewhere above and was standing at the yard entrance watching. "I can work with them every morning if you'll allow it." "You're not a sworn brother," Thorn said, from behind Mormont. He'd followed, apparently, because Thorn was a man who followed things. "No." Naruto looked at him. "I'm the person who killed 63 wights and 2 white walkers last night with no assistance. Whether or not I've said words over a fire doesn't seem relevant." The yard was very quiet. Mormont's expression was doing that almost smile thing again. "Every morning, Uzumaki. Don't break anyone." By the time the afternoon came around, Naruto had been in 3 separate conversations that were all, at their core, the same conversation, men trying to establish whether he was dangerous, whether he was trustworthy, and whether he was the same category of person they usually dealt with. He gave each the same treatment, direct honesty, no performance, no deference, and watched the calibration happen in real time. Sam Tarly caught him in the library. It wasn't a library exactly, more a room with shelves and the smell of old parchment, containing enough books to constitute a significant concentration of this world's written knowledge. Sam was there with 3 books open simultaneously, the large comfortable disarray of someone in their natural habitat, and he looked up when Naruto walked in with an expression of such uncomplicated welcome that it was briefly startling. "You can read," Naruto said, looking at the books. Then felt he needed to clarify, "I mean, can you read the old language? The really old one?" Jon mentioned some of the oldest texts about the White Walkers are in a different script. "Old tongue, yes, I can read it. And High Valyrian, though that's less relevant here." Sam had the focused energy of someone who'd been looking for an excuse to have exactly this conversation. He pushed one of the books forward. I've been reading everything I can find about the Long Night. The last time the White Walkers came south. There are things in here. He stopped, reorganized, started again. They stopped them. 8,000 years ago. Someone stopped them. And the records say it wasn't the wall came after, the wall was a consequence, not the cause. Something else drove them back. Naruto sat down across from him, leaned on the table. What? The records are fragmented. And 3/4 of what we have might be legend rather than history. Sam turned a page, pointed. The script was archaic, angular. But this passage says, roughly translated, that the first hero, the one who drove them back, used a weapon of fire. And before you think it's just a metaphor for a flaming sword or something, the passage specifically says the fire was inside him. The fire that walks like a man. Naruto was very still for a moment. That sounds, he said carefully, less like a magic sword. It does, doesn't it? Sam looked at him over the book with the excited, slightly nervous expression of a person whose theory has just received unexpected validation. I'm not saying it's you specifically. Obviously the person in this account lived 8,000 years ago. But whatever they were, whatever enabled them to push back something the wall can only hold, might be the same category as what you are. He paused. Is that offensive? I'm sorry if it's not offensive. Naruto looked at the old script. Can you translate this whole passage? I've been doing that all morning. Sam pulled out a sheet of parchment covered in his handwriting, neat, cramped, thorough. The hero in the story is described as someone who carried warmth that was not his own. Who held within him a spirit that the cold could not silence. He looked up. And the reason the walkers were driven back wasn't just the hero's power. It was something the hero showed the dead, something that made the White Walkers hold on the Whites' break. He turned another page. I can't make sense of that part yet. Interesting, Kurama said, with the particular tone that meant he was thinking hard about something. Keep working on it, Naruto said. All of it. Every record you have about the Long Night, about the White Walkers, about the magic they use. You're the most useful person in Castle Black right now, Sam. Sam blinked. Looked like he was going to say something self-deprecating and then thought better of it and simply nodded, turning back to his books with renewed energy. Naruto left the library and went looking for Mormont. The mole's town ranging happened the following dawn. 5 men, as Mormont had specified, Jon, because Jon had apparently designated himself Naruto's operational partner without anyone formally declaring it, Gren, because he was big and brave and had taken surprisingly well to the morning training, a quiet ranger named Dolorous Ed who communicated mostly in resigned observations, and 2 older rangers whose names Naruto had gotten straight because he made it a point to know the name of anyone he was going into danger with. Mole's Town was barely a town. 40 structures, maybe, half of them underground, built into the earth for warmth, the whole settlement sitting in a slight depression in the landscape that made it invisible until you were almost on top of it. The smell reached them first, and that smell was wrong. Not decomposition, that would have been more normal, somehow. Instead a stillness. An absence of the small sounds and smells that living places made. No smoke from chimneys. No animals. 3 farms east of town, said the older ranger, Ryler. That's where families went missing. The town itself first, Naruto said. He had his Sage Mode running before they'd entered the depression. What he found made him slow down, process it carefully. Living signatures, maybe 15 people, scared out of their minds, inside the largest underground structure. And outside, scattered through the other buildings, moving with that horrible purposeless shambling, 12 whites, he said quietly. 4 inside buildings on the north side. 3 moving in the main street. 5 near the eastern edge. He looked at Jon. 15 survivors in the central underground room. Jon stared at him. How do you, later? We clear the wights first, keep quiet, avoid fire if we can, the buildings are mostly wood and we don't want to trap the survivors. He looked at the group. Jon, take Gren and Ed, come from the east. I'll take the north buildings and the main street simultaneously. Ryler, Dennis, hold the southern exit in case anything comes from the farms. They didn't question it. The training that morning had done something, not just technique but authority. When someone who's already demonstrated what they can do gives a clear instruction, the impulse to argue about hierarchy evaporates. Naruto went in alone. The first wight in the main street was a woman who'd been middle-aged and sturdy, with a farmer's hands and the remnants of a wool dress. Blue-eyed, jerky-moving, turning toward him with that absent terrible hunger. He caught it by the head and twisted, fast and precise, not enough for fire in an enclosed space. Enough to stop the movement. He dropped it, turned, took the second and third in a combined movement that lasted about 4 seconds and left him standing in the middle of the street with 3 motionless bodies at his feet and his hands barely dirty. The 4 in the north buildings were trickier, cramped quarters, ice underfoot, but he'd fought in worse. The sounds he made were minimal. Controlled. From the east he heard Jon's party engaging, the clang of steel, a muffled shout quickly suppressed, movement. Clean. Good. He got the last 2 near the eastern edge first and then hit the farms, a kilometer out, the missing families reduced to 3 more wights circling a burned structure. He dealt with them in under a minute, stood in the snow outside the burned building, and felt the absence where 3 people used to be. He didn't let it sit in him for long. There was a difference between acknowledging loss and drowning in it. Kakashi-sensei had taught him that, though Kakashi had taught it more by example than by words. When he came back, Jon was outside the central underground structure, and from inside Naruto could hear, slowly, carefully, the sounds of living people beginning to understand that they were still alive. A woman crying, not from grief but from the specific relief of a person who'd been certain they were going to die and had turned out to be wrong. Jon was looking at the wights Naruto had left in the street. At the manner in which they'd been stopped. You did that by hand, Jon said. Fire risk was too high in the buildings. That's not what yes, I understand why. He looked up. Naruto. You took the head off that one with your bare hands. I've been doing harder things since I was 12. He said it without pride, just as fact. How are your people? Fine. Dolorous Ed got a bite on his arm, the armor held, nothing through to skin. Jon's jaw was tight. The family from the farms? No. He looked at Jon directly. 3 wights east. Already dealt with. Jon absorbed that the way he absorbed things, quietly, storing the grief somewhere internal, adding it to what was clearly an already substantial collection. We should start getting the survivors organized. They'll need to come back to Castle Black, they can't stay here. Agreed. I'll carry anything heavy. He paused. Actually, 2 of the underground rooms have grain stores that look intact. We should bring those. Jon looked at him. You checked the grain stores. I was hungry this morning. I'm planning ahead. And Jon Snow, in the middle of a ruined village with 5 newly made wights in the snow and 15 shell-shock survivors inside, laughed, a short, genuine, surprised sound that he seemed slightly caught off guard by himself. He covered it quickly but it was already out there, and Naruto filed it carefully alongside Ghost's willingness to sit with him and Sam's excited scholarship as evidence that this specific collection of people, this particular constellation of individuals in their black cloaks and their quiet desperation, was worth the trouble of protecting. The march back was harder than the march out, 15 survivors, including 4 children and 2 elderly people, moving at the pace of the slowest among them, the January cold dropping as afternoon wore into evening. Naruto carried the 2 oldest people on his back for the last hour without being asked, both of them too exhausted to protest and too grateful to speak. A child fell asleep against his shoulder by the time Castle Black's lights came into view. He felt the weight of her small body against his chest and thought about Konohamaru. Thought about the village. Thought about a world very far away where people knew his name. Don't, Kurama said quietly. I'm not. You are. I'm allowed to miss it. Yes. You are. The fox's voice was gentle, genuinely gentle, the gentleness that Kurama had arrived at slowly and kept relatively private, as if his dignity required him not to be too obviously kind. Missing it doesn't mean losing it. I know. He adjusted the sleeping child. I know. Mormont was at the gate when they came in. He looked at the survivors, at the grain, at the sleeping child against Naruto's shoulder, and his face did something complex that resolved into the expression of a man who has received more than he asked for and is recalculating accordingly. After the survivors were settled, the maester called Iman, who was ancient and blind and had a quality of concentrated stillness that Naruto associated with very powerful people who'd chosen peace over conflict. After they were fed and warmed and tended, Naruto sat with Jon in the common room and Jon told him about the world. He told it the way a person who grew up inside a system describes it, without ever quite stepping outside it, describing the angles from the inside, which paradoxically gave Naruto the clearest picture. The Seven Kingdoms. The Iron Throne. The war building in the south between 5 different men who all wanted the same chair. The politics of noble houses, the machinery of succession and betrayal, the particular cruelty of a world where birth determined everything. He told Naruto about his own birth, the bastard of Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, with a mother no one would name. He told it plainly, without self-pity, but the plainness itself was the tell. People who had truly made peace with something didn't have to work that hard at being neutral about it. Naruto listened to all of it. Then he asked specific questions, clarifying, mapping, building the picture. An hour in, he had a functional understanding of a political landscape that was, in its essentials, not that different from the 5 great nations, multiple competing powers, contested borders, complicated alliances, every large player maintaining their position through a combination of force, marriage, and carefully managed information. The names were different. The mechanisms were old, pre-industrialized, feudal. But people wanting power and using other people to get it was apparently a universal constant across dimensions. What about the North? He asked. Your family's territory. Jon's face changed slightly. Winterfell holds the North. My Lord Stark rules there. Was summoned south by the king. He paused, and the pause had a specific quality. I haven't heard from him in months. And the wall reports to the throne. In theory. In practice, Jon made a short sound. The South has stopped caring about the wall. About us. The war in the South is all that matters to them. They think the wall's problems are, he stopped. Stories? Naruto offered. Stories. Jon's jaw tightened. They'll care when the dead reach King's Landing. They won't reach King's Landing. Naruto said it simply, without dramatics. Not while I'm here. Jon looked at him. You can't, I'm not making a promise about stopping a whole army by myself forever. I'm saying they won't reach King's Landing. He met Jon's eyes. Because we're going to solve this. Not hold it. Solve it. He leaned forward. Whatever stopped them 8,000 years ago, Sam is working on it. Your Maester Eamon has access to knowledge other people don't. And the White Walkers themselves, I've engaged 2 of them up close. I know what hurts them. We just need more data. Jon was watching him with that quality of careful attention that Naruto was coming to recognize as Jon's particular form of respect, not deferring, but genuinely considering. You've been here 2 days, Jon said. And I've already tripled the food supply for the survivors, cleared Mole's town, established a new combat training regimen, and identified 2 critical intelligence gaps about the nature of our enemy. He raised an eyebrow. I'm efficient. Tripled the food supply. Jon glanced at the grain they'd brought back. I had to. I'm eating a lot of it. He was entirely serious. Jon did the laugh that surprised himself again, and this time didn't cover it, and it filled the common room for a moment, a genuinely young sound in a place that had forgotten young sounded like. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, Naruto did the following. He attended every morning training session and made the Night's Watch substantially better at not dying. He ate approximately a quarter of Castle Black's monthly food reserves, which Mormont documented without comment. He went north twice alone and came back with intelligence reports that he delivered verbally to Mormont with such precision and detail that the Lord Commander began treating them as ground truth. He had 6 separate conversations with Maester Eamon, who was the most interesting person in the castle, blind, 300-odd years old, the last surviving Targaryen before a certain queen across the sea, with a quality of perception that had nothing to do with vision, and he let Ghost sleep next to him at night because Ghost had decided this was happening and Ghost was not negotiable on the subject. On the 4th day, a raven came. Naruto was in the yard when the commotion started. Ravens came and went regularly, the Watch's information lifeline to the south, but this one landed different. He could tell from the way the duty officer ran rather than walked from the rookery. Could tell from the way Jon, training across the yard, went very still in the way people go still when they've been dreading a message that's just arrived. He didn't ask immediately. He watched Jon go to Mormont. Watched the Lord Commander read the letter. Watched Mormont's face do something that it very rarely did, something cracked through the control, just briefly, and what showed underneath was grief. Jon came back to the yard 10 minutes later. He crossed directly to Naruto. His face was contained but his eyes were not. "My father," Jon said. "Eddard Stark." He stopped. "He's been arrested. Charged with treason against the crown." Naruto waited. "King Robert is dead. The king's son, a boy of 13, has taken the throne. And the people around that throne," Jon's voice was very level, which was the same thing as it not being level at all. "They're not good people. What does this mean for you?" "Nothing. I took the oath. I'm bound to the wall." He said it like someone who has decided a thing and will not be argued out of it, and Naruto didn't argue. But he looked at Jon, looked at the weight that had just been added to a collection that was already substantial, and said quietly, "If you need to talk about any of it, I'm here." Jon looked at him, surprised by the directness of it. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He held Jon's gaze. "I've never had a father either. Different circumstances, but I know what it feels like when that particular absence does something new." Jon was very still for a moment. Ghost pressed against his leg from one side. Naruto stood on the other, not filling the silence, just being in it. "The Lord Commander wants to lead a great ranging," Jon said finally. "North of the wall. A proper one, with the full force of the Watch. To find out what's actually happening up there." He looked north. "He's been planning it for a while." This, he meant his father. "The letter. I think this pushes the timeline forward. He'll want to move while the South is distracted." "Smart," Naruto said. "It could kill everyone who goes. Or it could be the most important ranging in 8,000 years." He looked north with Jon. The wall rose against the sky behind them, enormous and ancient and cold. "I'll go." "I know you will," Jon said. "That's the first thing I was certain about when I met you." That evening, Naruto climbed to the top of the wall alone, no Ghost this time, though he half expected the wolf to follow. He stood at the northern edge in the dark and reached out with his Sage Mode as far as it would go and read the landscape. The gathering he'd sensed 4 days ago was larger now. More concentrated. The dead were assembling with a patience and purpose that had a shape to it, not random accumulation but directed gathering, something calling them, something organizing them with the same cold intelligence the White Walkers had demonstrated when they chose to retreat rather than waste themselves. And at the center of that gathering, in the absolute north where the natural energy had gone completely silent, the wound in the world was awake. Not moving south yet. But aware. Aware in a new way. It had felt him sensing it and it was looking back. "You know I'm here," Naruto said quietly to the dark. The cold pressed against him, a focused pressure rather than ambient temperature, and in that pressure there was something that wasn't a voice but communicated like one, ancient, vast, certain. A conviction that had been building for 8,000 years, patient as geology, as inevitable as winter itself. It wasn't threatening him. It was acknowledging him the way one force of nature acknowledges another. "It's curious," Kurama said softly. "Yeah. It's not like the walkers. Not even like the most ancient things I've encountered. It's different." The fox was quiet for a moment. "It might be the oldest thing that still moves in any world either of us has ever touched. What does it want? What all old things want eventually. To matter. To finish something." Kurama paused. "It has a design, Naruto. Not just hunger. A design." That was the detail that sat in him long after he'd stepped back from the edge and started down. Not the size of the threat. Not the numbers. The design. The intention behind it. Because intention meant thought. Thought meant a perspective. And a perspective, no matter how ancient or cold or absolute, could be argued with. He reached the bottom of the wall with that thought warm in his chest like a coal, and crossed the yard to the barracks, and slept 5 hours of the 8 he needed, and when he woke he could hear Sam Tarly already in the library, turning pages in the dark. Some things were worth protecting. This cold, small, frightened, brave, stubborn collection of people in their black cloaks, with their terrible food and their ancient wall and their absolutely insufficient numbers, was one of them. He knew that the way he knew his own heartbeat. Chapter 3, Fire in the Snow. The ranging party went out 12 days after Naruto arrived at Castle Black, and 11 days after it should have come back. 6 men, experienced rangers, Mormont had said, men who knew the forests north of the wall the way they knew the back of their own hands. A routine scout, 2 days out, 2 days back. They were looking for signs of increased white activity northeast of the castle, following up on reports from a wildling who'd come to the gate half-frozen and barely coherent, talking about fires in the dark and things that walked after they should have stopped. On the 3rd day, their horse came back alone. On the 7th day, Mormont stopped pretending the silence was normal. On the 11th day, Naruto walked into the Lord Commander's office at dawn, Ghost at his heel, and said, "I'm going after them." Mormont was already awake. He was always already awake. Naruto was beginning to suspect the Lord Commander operated on the same basic sleep schedule as a siege engine, minimal maintenance, maximum function, no complaint. "Alone," Mormont said. "Not quite a question. Faster that way. If the White Walkers took them, then I'll deal with the White Walkers." He said it plainly, the way he'd say I'll carry that if something needed lifting. Mormont looked at him across the map table for a long moment, the look of a man running calculations, weighing variables, arriving at a conclusion he'd probably reached before Naruto walked in the room. Northeast. They were following the Milkwater tributary, the smaller branch, not the main river. Last confirmed position was at a place the rangers call Whitetree. You'll know it by a massive weirwood with a carved face. Got it. If you find them alive, bring them back. A pause. If you find them not alive, I'll bring them back anyway, Naruto said. Nobody stays north of the wall. Something moved in Mormont's face at that. He gave a single nod. Jon will want to go. Jon stays. If something happens to me, the watch needs someone who can actually lead. He held up a hand before Mormont could speak. I'm not being modest. I'm being strategic. Jon Snow is the best officer you have and you know it. Keep him here. Mormont was quiet. Then, if something happens to you, if you don't return, give me 5 days. If I'm not back in 5 days, assume something interesting happened. He turned to leave. Naruto. He stopped. Bring my men home. The Lord Commander's voice had shed its formal weight entirely. It was just a man asking. Whatever's left of them. Yeah, Naruto said. I will. He went north alone in the gray early morning, through the gate tunnel that always smelled of old ice and cold stone, the wall rising on his left as he emerged on the northern side and the forest swallowing him almost immediately. He ran at a pace that would have broken a horse inside an hour, the trees blurring, his breath steaming in the cold air, Sage Mode drinking in the natural energy of the forest. Up here the natural energy was thicker than at the wall, denser, older, less touched, and it filled him in long deep pulls that made his entire nervous system feel like a live wire. Northeast, Kurama said, orienting him. I'm reading 50, 60 dead signatures scattered through a 12-kilometer radius. None concentrated, patrol patterns, maybe. Something keeping them spread. Keeping territory, Naruto said. Like scouts. Exactly like scouts. A pause. The 6 humans you're looking for, I can't read them yet. Either they're too far or don't say it. I was going to say they might be underground. Some of these wildling paths go below ground, caves, earthworks. The dead signatures would mask anything inside. Right. Sorry. You're anxious. I'm focused. He pushed the pace higher, the trees becoming a gray-brown blur on either side. Different thing. Is it? He didn't answer that. Whitetree appeared 3 hours into the run, a clearing around a massive weirwood, ancient and enormous, its white bark luminous against the gray of everything else. The carved face was exactly as Mormont had described, deep-set eyes, a screaming mouth, the expression of something that had been witnessing the forest for so long that witnessing had become its only mode. Red sap ran from the carved eyes like frozen tears. The clearing around it had been a battlefield. Not recently, maybe a week old, the snow having partially covered the evidence. But it was unmistakable. Disturbed ground in the patterns of moving bodies, several spots of old blood black against the white, pieces of equipment, a broken spear, a torn cloak, a boot, scattered with the random logic of things lost during violent movement. Naruto read the sight quickly, moving in a low crouch, Sage Mode pulling in every detail. 6 sets of boot prints converging on the clearing from the south. They'd made a stand around the weirwood, he could see that, backed up to the tree, giving themselves a wall. Smart, if futile. The white signatures were overwhelming, dozens of approach paths from the north and east. The rangers had been overrun and moved, the boot prints leading away were deeper, irregular. People being herded or dragged rather than walking. Northeast, he said, reading the direction of the deepest prints. Something took them northeast deliberately. The 2 white walkers that escaped you, Kurama said. They're in that direction. He followed. The trail went 6 kilometers through increasingly dense forest, the trees growing older and stranger the further north he pushed, the bark almost black, the canopy locked overhead in a weave so tight it blocked the sky entirely, the light dropping to something barely above darkness. His Sage Mode compensated, painting the landscape in the living pulse of natural energy, making the black trees glow faintly gold in his perception. Then, in a shallow depression between 2 ridges, surrounded by standing dead things in a loose circle, he found them. 5 of the 6 were still alive. Barely. They were bound, not with rope but with ice, actual ice formations that had grown around their wrists and ankles, pinning them against a massive fallen trunk like insects in amber. They were conscious, some of them, staring at Naruto with the hollow-eyed expression of people who'd been cold and terrified for so long that the capacity for reaction had simply burned out. Their breath was visible, just. Their lips were blue. 2 were unconscious, breathing, but with the shallow irregularity of bodies starting to give up. The 6th member of the ranging party was standing on the other side of the fallen log. Standing wrong. His eyes were blue. Oh, Naruto said quietly. The 20-odd whites in the circle oriented on him as a unit, that simultaneous jerky snap of attention that he'd seen in the clearing on his first night, which still, objectively, gave him the crawling certainty that they were being centrally directed, They started moving inward. He didn't let them get far. One hand sign. 30 shadow clones, flooding the depression, and his actual body was already moving toward the log, toward the 5 living men, calculating as he went, the ice bindings, the temperature, the fastest way to free someone without cracking frozen skin. He ran chakra into his palms, Kurama's warmth, controlled and precise, and pressed both hands to the ice around the nearest man's wrists. The ice melted in seconds, not from heat so much as from the chakra actively dismantling the formation structure. "Can you move?" he asked. The man, late 30s, hard face, beard full of ice crystals, stared at him with the dazed expression of a person who'd stopped believing in rescue. He opened his mouth. Closed it. "Nod if you can move." A nod. "Good. I'm going to free all 5 of you. When I do, stay low, stay behind me, move south toward the weirwood clearing. Don't run, walk fast, controlled. Don't look at the wights." He was already moving to the second man, working the ice. "Behind me means directly behind me, inside arm's reach if possible." "Understood." Ragged acknowledgements. He moved fast, faster than he probably should have, because the clones were handling the wights, but the 6th man, the one with blue eyes, was just standing there watching him work, which was not something wights did. Wights didn't watch. They lurched. The standing, watching quality meant something else was using those eyes. He freed the last 2 men, the unconscious ones, and slung one over each shoulder without ceremony, both of them stirring at the warmth of contact. Looked up. The blue-eyed man was 10 feet away. He'd moved in the time Naruto had his back turned, crossing the distance with the wrong quality of movement, too smooth, the white jerkiness gone, replaced by something more deliberate. In those blue eyes, behind the death, was the same cold intelligence he'd seen in the White Walkers. "You're being worn," Naruto said. "Like a suit." The blue eyes regarded him. "Is this how you communicate? Wearing people?" He kept his voice level. "Factual. That's either very convenient or a significant limitation." "I'm guessing limitation." No response. The blue-eyed man raised one hand, and the remaining wights, his clones had been busy, surged. He dropped into a low crouch with both unconscious men still across his shoulders, used one arm to sweep the nearest 3 wights' legs simultaneously with a chakra-enhanced strike, called back the bulk of his clones into a wall formation around the living rangers, and breathed a wide cone of fire over the cluster of wights pushing in from the north side. They went up properly this time. He'd been tracking what made the burns thorough, and the ones he didn't ignite immediately he caught with follow-up clone strikes, systematic, fast, no wasted motion. The blue-eyed man watched all of it without moving. When the last wight was down and the blue fire had caught properly, Naruto stood in the middle of the depression with both hands full of unconscious rangers and looked at the 6th man. "I'm not killing you," he said. "Whatever you were before you died, you don't deserve to be used like this." He let Kurama's chakra come up properly, not the full cloak, just enough to let the golden-red light bleed into his skin and push back the cold in a visible radius. The temperature in the depression jumped 15 degrees. The ice on the log softened. "And you," he directed it at the cold intelligence behind the blue eyes. "I know you can see this. I know you know what this is. I'm coming north for you. Not to threaten. Because we need to have a conversation." The blue eyes went flat. Then the animation drained from the dead man's body in an instant, dropped like someone had cut a string, and the body collapsed bonelessly into the snow. Naruto looked at it for a moment. Then he turned south, where the 4 walking rangers had already started moving, shell-shocked and stumbling but moving, and he walked after them with the 2 unconscious men across his shoulders and his clones running perimeter. The walk back was long. The conscious rangers didn't speak for the first hour, which was fine. They were cycling through the physiological aftermath of extreme cold and fear, and he let them cycle without rushing it. He kept the chakra heat bleeding outward enough to stop them getting colder while they moved, a steady warmth that none of them commented on but all of them leaned toward unconsciously. The man he'd freed first, the one who'd nodded when he asked if he could move, was named Jeremy Ricker, one of the more senior rangers, with the calm of someone who'd metabolized the worst already and come out the other side into a flat, functional clarity. He fell into step beside Naruto after the second hour. "The sixth man," Ricker said. "Garrett." "I know." He said it simply. "When they took us, he was the first one down. A walker touched him and he just," Ricker stopped. "He didn't fight. It was instant. One touch and they turn. The walker didn't even swing. Just put its hand on his chest and the light went out of him." Ricker's voice was controlled but his hands weren't. "The rest of us, they wanted us alive. The two walkers, they kept the wights off us. Kept us cold but kept us breathing." He looked sideways at Naruto. "Why?" "Bait," Naruto said. "For me. They knew I'd come looking." He said it matter-of-factly. "They've been adapting to me faster than I expected. 2 days after our first engagement they were setting traps." He paused. "That's a faster tactical update cycle than I've seen from anything I've fought before." Ricker absorbed this with the expression of someone adding one more terrible thing to a list that had gotten quite long. "They put Garrett in our eye line," he said. "Someone we knew. Someone who looked almost right. They knew that would make us slower to react." "Psychological warfare," Naruto agreed. "That's not instinct." He looked north briefly. "They understand grief. They understand that humans hesitate when grief is involved. They've been studying us for a very long time. How do we fight something like that?" "You don't hesitate," Naruto said simply. "Not about the dead. About the people still alive, never stop caring. But about the dead," he shook his head. "Garrett was already gone when that walker touched him. Grieving him is right. But the thing wearing him was not him." Ricker was quiet for a long time after that. "Then, you're 17. "Yes. "You're sure?" "My birthday is October 10th. "I was born during the Kyubi attack," he stopped. None of those references meant anything here. "Yes. I'm sure." "Where you come from," Ricker said carefully. "Do all 17-year-olds, "No," Naruto said. "Just me, mostly." The weirwood clearing materialized through the trees ahead, the great white tree luminous in the late afternoon gray, its carved face watching them arrive with that expression of ancient, unsurprised witness. Naruto set the two unconscious men down carefully, propped against the weirwood roots, and checked them both, pulse stronger now, color returning to the lips and fingertips from the sustained warmth of the march. They'd make it. He looked up at the carved face. There was something here. He'd felt it when he passed through on the way north, a quality in the natural energy around this tree that was different from the surrounding forest. Not alien, not threatening. Old, like Kurama was old, like Maester Eamon was old in a human way, but a different category of old. The kind of old that remembered things no person was alive to remember. He put one hand on the bark. The natural energy around it shifted immediately, rushing toward the contact point, pouring into him in a flood that was nothing like what he'd been taking in during normal Sage Mode absorption. This was structured. Intentional. Like the tree was pushing information rather than him pulling energy. Flashes. Not visions, he'd had visions with the Sage of Six Paths, he knew what those felt like. These were impressions. Emotional residue. 8,000 years of memory stored in a tree that saw everything and forgot nothing, and near the surface of all that memory, recent and sharp and urgent, one specific impression, cold. A cold that extended in every direction, that had been absolute, that had broken against one specific point of warmth. The warmth had been like Kurama. Not the same. But the same category. Fire that walks like a man, Kurama said softly. Sam's translation. He took his hand off the bark. The 5 living rangers were all watching him. He hadn't been still for more than 10 seconds, but something about those 10 seconds had communicated itself anyway, the way a change in air pressure communicates before a storm. "Let's move," he said. "I'll carry the two out." They made the wall just before full dark. Castle Black went from quiet to loud the moment they came through the gate, the surviving rangers surrounded by brothers who'd been waiting, bodies carried to the maester's care, Jon appearing at Naruto's shoulder with Ghost and a look that asked several questions simultaneously. Naruto answered the most important one first. 5 alive. 1 turned. I dealt with it. He watched Jon's face absorb this. The 2 walkers that escaped the first night, they set the trap. They used one of your men as bait. Tactical, Jon said, very quietly. Yeah. You said they were tactical before. Nobody argued with you, but I don't think everyone, they'll believe it now, Naruto said. Ricker will tell them. He looked around the yard, at the Night's Watch doing what it did when men came home, the controlled relief, the careful not showing how afraid they'd been. They also killed one of the 6 on contact. Not a fight. A touch. The walker touched him and he turned instantly. Jon was very still. That changes things, Jon said. The dragon glass becomes more critical. Not just for destroying them, for keeping distance. They can't be allowed to make physical contact with someone you want to keep alive. He paused. How much dragon glass do you have? Some. Not enough. Jon's jaw was tight. Mormont has been trying to get more from Dragonstone for months. No response. Dragon glass. Dragonstone. He filed the name for later. There was a geography to the dragonglass supply that would matter eventually. What's at Dragonstone? A castle. On a volcanic island. Jon paused. Supposedly the largest deposit of dragonglass in Westeros is under that castle. It was a Targaryen stronghold. He paused again. It might be occupied again soon, if the rumors from the east are true. What rumors? Daenerys Targaryen. The last of the dynasty. She's been building something across the narrow sea, armies, allies. Jon looked at him. And dragons. Actual dragons. 3 of them. Naruto processed this. That's relevant. Most people think she'll come for the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne can wait. The dead can't. He looked north. If she has dragons, fire that actually matters, fire on a scale that would change the entire equation north of the wall, he shook his head. That's a conversation for later. Right now we need to figure out what I found at the Weirwood. They found Sam in the library, as always, surrounded by his perpetual landscape of open books and frustrated progress. He looked up when they came in, saw Naruto's expression, and immediately shoved 3 books to one side to clear space at the table. Tell me, Sam said. Naruto told him about the Weirwood. The impression of warmth versus cold. The structured information in the natural energy. Sam listened with his whole body, leaning forward, fingers moving over his book pages without looking at them, the habit of a person whose hands needed to be doing something while his mind ran. The Weirwoods are connected, Sam said, when Naruto finished. All of them, through their root systems, it's in the oldest texts, buried under a lot of religious interpretation, but the core idea is there. They share information. There, he struggled for the right framing. Not a network exactly. More like a memory. A living archive. He pulled a book toward him, flipped pages. The children of the forest, the original inhabitants of this continent, before men, they used the Weirwoods as a communication system. As memory storage. He stopped at a page, read quickly, looked up. They used them for seeing. For looking into the past. The past, Naruto said. Can they show the long night? The last time this happened? If what you're describing is what I think it is, Sam was already moving, pulling a second book, cross-referencing. The person who stopped the White Walkers the first time. The hero with the fire inside him. There might be a record of what he did specifically. Not in written text from that period is basically mythology by now, but in the weirwoods. He looked up. If the trees remember. They remember, Naruto said. I'd stake my life on it. Then you need to go back. To a weirwood closer to the original events, the oldest one. The records say there was a massive weirwood at a place called the Isle of Faces, in the center of Westeros, too far for now. He looked at Sam. Are there older ones north of the wall? Sam hesitated. The haunted forest is full of them. And, in the really deep north, beyond where any ranging has ever gone, he stopped himself. There are stories. Just stories. About a place called the Cave of the Three-Eyed Raven. Jon had gone very still. What's the Three-Eyed Raven? Naruto asked. Old stories, Jon said. The kind Maester Lewin told me when I was small to make me sleep badly. He paused. A green seer, someone who can see through the weirwoods. Who uses their connection to see through time. That's what I need, Naruto said. Someone who can look through the weirwood memory and show me what stopped the White Walkers the first time. They'd have to be north of the wall, Sam said quietly. Far north. I'm going north of the wall anyway, Naruto said. The Great Ranging. Sam and Jon exchanged a look, the particular look of two people who've been having the same conversation in different rooms and have just realized they've arrived at the same conclusion. Mormont's timeline is moving, Jon said. The news from the south, my father's arrest, the war, he's worried about being cut off from resupply entirely. He wants to move within the fortnight. Good. Naruto leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, processing. Then between now and the fortnight, we do two things. First, we need to talk to Maester Aemon. About what? About Daenerys Targaryen. About dragons. About whether there's any way to send a message that gets through faster than the political machinery of a kingdom at war. He looked at Sam. And second, Sam, can you reach a weirwood from inside the wall? In the God's Wood? Sam blinked. There's a heart tree in the castle Black God's Wood. Take me there tonight. The God's Wood was a small thing, a quiet courtyard with a weirwood heart tree at its center, much younger than the great tree at Whiteree, its carved face newer, its bark not yet fully white. But it had the connection. He'd felt it when he passed through the castle initially, the faint thread of structured energy running south through root systems he couldn't see. He sat cross-legged at the base of the tree while Sam watched with a worried scholarly expression and Jon stood at the God's Wood entrance, giving him space while maintaining a proximity that was protective without being intrusive. Ghost was there, naturally. Lying across Naruto's feet with his massive white head on his paws, perfectly still. Naruto went into deep Sage Mode, not the combat mode, not the passive sensing mode, but the meditative depth where he'd communed with Shima and Fukasaku, where the natural energy became a language rather than a fuel. He reached into it and followed the thread south, through the root system, touching the connection points where one tree networked into another, feeling the accumulated memory passing through them. He pushed deeper. Went further south along the network. Found older nodes, weirwoods in the haunted forest with roots that went down 100 feet. And through them, further south, the weight of accumulated memory from tens of thousands of years. He wasn't looking for all of it. He was looking for one specific thing. Fire. Warmth. The touch of something like Kurama in a body like his. He found it 3 layers deep, buried under 8,000 years of accumulated forest memory, small and bright and absolutely unmistakable, the impression of a bijou or something that functioned like one, searing and golden against the black cold record of the long night. And with it, not a clear picture, not a story with a beginning and end, but the shape of a method. Not a weapon. Not a technique. Something the hero had done, at the end, with everything he had, something that had required every last piece of what he was, that had broken the White Walkers' control. Not killed them. Not destroyed them. Broken their hold on the dead. And the key to it was the thing he shared with the Walker, not the thing that made them different. He came out of the deep Sage Mode with a gasp, Ghost on his feet immediately and pressing against his side. Sam was crouched next to him with an expression of pure scientific terror. Jon had crossed the God's Wood without apparent awareness of having done it and was half kneeling in the snow beside him. "What did you see?" Jon asked. Naruto sat for a moment, breathing, letting the depth of the trance recede. His hands were trembling, not from cold, from the sustained intensity of the deep absorption. "The end of the long night," he said. "How it was done." "How?" He looked at Jon. He looked at Sam. The God's Wood was very quiet, the heart tree watching them with its carved face, the red sap frozen in tracks down its white bark. "I need to understand the White Walkers better before I tell you that," he said. "Because the answer makes no sense yet without understanding what they are. What they actually are, not legends, not stories. What they are." Sam sat down fully in the snow, which said something about the state of Sam's composure. "I've been reading everything," he said. "And there's a passage. In one of the oldest texts." He looked at his hands. "It says the White Walkers were made." He looked up. "Not born. Made. By the children of the forest. As a weapon. Against the first men." The God's Wood was very quiet. "A weapon," Jon said. "That got out of control," Sam finished. "That's what the text implies. That the makers lost control of what they made." He looked at Naruto. "Which would mean that the Night King, whatever commands them, was once something else. Someone else." Naruto looked at the heart tree. "Someone else," he said slowly. "Yes." He sat with that for a long moment, the full weight of it, the terrible specific tragedy of it. Something made as a weapon, turned loose, 8,000 years of cold purpose accumulating around what had once been, what? A person? A creature? Something that had been given a specific nature, a specific cold, and had become that nature so completely that the original thing was buried under centuries of ice. Made. Not born. He thought about Gaara, a weapon made by his father's fear and his village's hatred, who had been all cold certainty and lethal purpose for years. He thought about himself, sealed with the 9 tails at birth, shaped by a purpose before he had a self. He thought about Kurama, created at the beginning of the world as a force of destruction, who had become something else entirely by the choice to trust rather than to fight. "You understand now," Kurama said. Very softly. "Yeah," Naruto said. "I understand now." Jon was watching him with the expression of someone seeing a calculation happen in real time and not quite following all the steps but trusting the mathematician. "What do you understand?" Naruto stood up. Brushed snow off his jacket. Ghost pressed against his hand and he scratched the wolf's ears automatically. "I understand," he said, "that this is a much bigger problem than a war. And also," he looked at both of them, at Sam still sitting in the snow surrounded by the ghost of his frightened scholarship, at Jon standing in the God's Wood with his sword at his hip and his father arrested in a distant city and the weight of the world on his shoulders. "That the solution is something I can do. Not easily. Not safely. But, I can do it." "How?" Sam asked. "The same way it was done the first time." He looked north, through the God's Wood wall, toward the wall itself, toward the dark beyond it. "I need to get close enough to the Night King to show him something." Jon stared at him. "Show him what?" "Another way." He paused. "Whether or not he takes it," he shrugged slightly. "That's on him. But I have to offer it." Jon opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "You want to walk up to the thing commanding an army of the dead and offer it a choice." "That's usually how I handle things," Naruto said. Sam made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been existential despair. It was hard to tell with Sam. The great ranging, Jon said finally. When we go north, I'll find what I need to find north of the wall. He turned back toward the castle proper, toward the lit windows and the smell of the mess hall's perpetual grey porridge. And if it doesn't go the way I want it to, he grinned over his shoulder, the real grin, the one that had irritated and disarmed better enemies than Jon Snow or Mormont or any White Walker. Then I'll just have to punch my way through. You say that like it's a legitimate backup plan, Jon said. In my experience, Naruto said, already walking, it almost always is. The fortnight passed. It passed with training every morning, with Sam's scholarship going deeper and darker, with Maester Eamon receiving Naruto in his tower rooms and talking with him for 3 hours straight about dragons and Targaryens and the nature of fire, with Ghost becoming a permanent fixture in Naruto's peripheral vision, with the specific quiet camaraderie of men preparing for something they knew was going to be very bad and choosing not to say so out loud. 3 days before the ranging was set to move, Thorn cornered Naruto in the armory. Naruto was looking at the dragonglass supply. There wasn't enough, there was never going to be enough, but he was trying to calculate how best to distribute what they had, when Thorn came in and closed the door behind him with the energy of a man who'd been deciding how to have a conversation for several days. You're not one of us, Thorn said. Naruto looked at him. Waited. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, you're not sworn to the watch. You have no rank. No obligation. Nothing that binds you here. Thorn's voice was clipped, precise, the voice of a man who was angry in a controlled and practiced way. And Mormont treats you like you're a senior officer. Mormont's practical, Naruto said. It undermines, Ser Alisar. He turned fully to face him. You're angry because a 17-year-old in an orange jacket walked in here and your men started listening to him without being ordered to. That's what this is about. He said it without contempt, just as observation. And I understand that. If someone like me showed up in my village and started doing what I do here, I'd be uncomfortable too. Thorn's jaw tightened. But your men are better than they were 2 weeks ago, Naruto continued. They'll survive things tomorrow that would have killed them yesterday. And the ranging is going to need every possible advantage, because where we're going, he paused. It's going to be very bad. And what happens to the watch matters to everyone on this continent, even the people who've forgotten you exist. Thorn stared at him. In the controlled anger something else was visible, the specific frustration of a man who agreed with an argument he resented. I'm not trying to take anything from you, Naruto said. I'm trying to make sure people come back alive. He looked at the dragonglass on the rack in front of him. Including you. Thorn was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the rack, took a dragonglass dagger, examined it with the practiced eye of someone who'd been handling weapons all his life. The men say you're from another world entirely, he said finally. Yes. What made you think it was your business to fix this one? Naruto looked at him, surprised by the directness of the question. It was, underneath the hostility, a genuine one. He thought about it honestly. My whole life, he said, I've had more power than most people, and the world kept presenting me with problems that needed it. At some point you stop asking if it's your business and start accepting that it found you for a reason. He paused. Or you don't. And things get worse. Thorn set the dagger down. Looked at Naruto for one long, assessing moment. You'll be at the front of the column when we march, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Then I'll be behind you, Thorn said. Where I can watch your back. A pause. And keep an eye on whatever comes out of it. It wasn't trust. It wasn't alliance. It was Thorn's particular form of grudging concession, the acknowledgement of reality by a man who was nothing if not a realist, regardless of what the reality cost him. Good enough, Naruto said. The night before the ranging, Mormont convened the full watch in the common hall. He stood at the head of the room with the gravity of a man who understood exactly what he was asking of the people in front of him. His speech was short, about duty, about the choice they'd all made when they swore the words, about the importance of what they were about to do and the fact that some of them would not come back. He said it plainly because his men deserved plainness. Then he looked at Naruto, who was sitting in the middle of the room beside Jon and Sam, Ghost at his feet. Most of you know by now what Naruto Uzumaki is, Mormont said. Those of you who haven't seen it with your own eyes have heard it from men who have. He is not of the Night's Watch. He is under no obligation to go north with us. He paused. He is going north with us. What that means for our odds, I'll leave you to assess yourself. In the hall, something shifted. Not cheering, these men were too tired for cheering, too experienced for easy enthusiasm. Something quieter and more genuine. A collective exhaling of fear that had been held too long, not gone but shared out, distributed from individual shoulders into something collective. Jon was looking at the table. Sam was looking at his hands. Naruto was looking at the Lord Commander, who was looking back at him with the expression of a man who has made peace with the fact that the most extraordinary thing in his vicinity is also the most unpredictable. After the hall emptied, after the fires were banked and the night settled over Castle Black with its particular variety of cold silence, Naruto climbed to the top of the wall one more time. Not to watch. Just to be there for a moment with the darkness on one side and the lights of the castle on the other. He thought about the long night. About fire that walks like a man. About the Night King made by the children of the forest, sealed into a nature not entirely its own, 8,000 years of cold and purpose piling up over something that had once been different. He thought about what he'd read in the Weirwood's memory, the shape of what the first hero had done, the terrible cost of it, the specific act that had broken the walker's power. And he thought about whether he could do it. Whether he was enough of what was needed. You are, Kurama said, with the simple certainty of a being who had watched him for 17 years and arrived at a clear conclusion. You don't know that for certain, Naruto said. No. A pause. But I know you. And I know what you carry. And I know, the fox was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet was the entire weight of their history, the ceiling, the fighting, the years of hostility and the slow tectonic shift towards something that had become, what? Partnership wasn't large enough. Friendship was too small. Something that had its own category and didn't need a name. I know that whatever is down there in that cold, in whatever the Night King has become, it has never encountered this. Us. What we are. Another pause. And that matters. Yeah, Naruto said. The darkness pressed against the north face of the wall below him. Inside it, far away but present, the wound in the world pulsed with its patient, ancient cold purpose. The great ranging would leave at dawn. He looked at the dark for a long time. Then he turned south, toward the lights, toward the black-cloaked men in their cold castle doing what men did before something terrible, sleeping, and talking quietly, and choosing to go anyway. He went back down. Chapter 4, The Wound in the World. 300 men left Castle Black at dawn. Naruto had seen armies march before, had marched in them, had led sections of them, had watched the Fourth Great Ninja War mobilize tens of thousands with the grinding organized urgency of a world trying to survive itself. 300 men was not an army. 300 men in black cloaks filing through the northern gate tunnel in the gray pre-dawn light, horses breathing steam, supply wagons rattling over frozen ground, was something different. It was 300 people who knew exactly how insufficient they were and had decided to go anyway. That quality, choosing to go anyway, was something Naruto had a lot of respect for. He walked at the front of the column, as he'd told Thorn he would, with Ghost ranging wide on his left and Jon Snow 2 paces to his right. Mormont rode at the column's head on his black horse, the old bear's face set in the particular expression of a man who has committed to a direction and will not look back. Sam was 3 rows in, riding a horse that seemed faintly embarrassed by him, already reading from a book balanced on the saddle, which should not have been possible at a walking pace and yet was somehow very Sam. The wall shrank behind them as the forest swallowed the column. For the first 2 hours, nothing. The haunted forest lived up to its name in the sense that it felt watched, that quality of dense, old growth where the trees were too close and too dark and the sound dampened in a way that made your own footsteps feel intrusive. Naruto had his Sage Mode running continuously at a low drain, reading the landscape in the circular pulse of natural energy, and what he found was consistent with what he'd been tracking for days from the wall's top. The dead were out here, but staying north, staying ahead of the column's pace rather than engaging it. They were being herded. He didn't say this out loud immediately. He walked with it for an hour, confirming the pattern, and then fell back to Mormont's horse. "They're staying ahead of us deliberately," he said quietly. "The wights. I'm reading scattered signatures north and northeast. They're not engaging, they're retreating at our pace. Drawing us forward." Mormont looked down at him from the horse. "You're certain?" "Certain enough." He matched the horse's walking pace easily. "It's not a trap in the conventional sense, they're not setting an ambush we're walking into. It's more like, they're choosing the ground. Pulling us toward where they want the engagement to happen." "The fist of the first men," Mormont said. He didn't say it like a guess. "You already suspected. It's the most defensible elevated ground north of the wall for 200 kilometers. If I were moving a large force and wanted to engage a column, I'd use it." He looked north. "The question is whether the dead understand defensible ground. They don't need to understand it. The White Walkers do." Naruto looked at the tree-line. "The walkers are commanding this. The wights are instruments. Think of the walkers like generals and the wights like units. The units don't need to understand the strategy. They just need to execute directions." Mormont absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, without visible reaction, processing completely. "What do you recommend?" "We don't change course. If we turn back or divert, we lose the initiative and they start choosing entirely. We go to the fist, we establish position, and we meet them on their chosen ground, except we know they've chosen it." He looked up at Mormont. "Knowing the trap doesn't spring it. It just means we go in with our eyes open. And your capabilities at the fist. In open ground. In open ground I'm significantly more dangerous than in a forest." He said it simply. "Give me space and time to reach full combat mode and the equation changes substantially." Mormont gave him a look that was equal parts confidence and the specific anxiety of a military commander who was about to rely on a factor he couldn't fully quantify. "Jon," he called back. Jon came forward from 2 rows back, ghost materializing from the tree-line to fall in beside him. "Ride with Uzumaki," Mormont said. "His intelligence on enemy movement, treat it as primary. If he tells you to move the column, move the column." Jon looked at Naruto. Something in his expression said he'd already been operating on this basis regardless. They made the first night camp at a defensible bend in the milkwater, the river half frozen, gray ice over dark water, the banks giving them natural protection on 2 sides. Fires were lit. Naruto had been emphatic about fires, arguing with the rangers who wanted to stay dark to avoid detection. The dead already knew where they were. The fire would keep the wights from coming too close during the night, because wights were directed by the walkers and the walkers were patient. They'd wait for the right moment. Fire was also the difference between men sleeping with enough warmth to fight effectively in the morning and men sleeping into hypothermia. He took the midnight watch himself, sitting cross-legged at the fire's edge with his Sage Mode open wide, reading the night. Ed sat with him, which Ed did because Ed had a gift for comfortable silence and because the night watch was his natural habitat. The man communicated an entire internal landscape through minimal expression, a slight downward adjustment of his already downward face, a specific exhalation, a look toward the dark that managed to convey resigned familiarity without words. "You're afraid," Naruto said, after about an hour. Ed considered this. "I'm usually afraid," he said. "The specificity of it varies. Tonight it's the particular flavor of afraid that comes from knowing something very large and very dead is somewhere in those trees calculating when to kill us all." "That's reasonable," Naruto said. "Is it?" Ed looked at him. "You don't seem afraid." "I'm not. He felt Ed waiting for a better answer and tried to give one. I've been genuinely terrified a handful of times in my life. What I am right now is, he thought about it. Focused. Concerned. Aware of what's at stake. He looked at the fire. Fear makes you hesitate. What I have doesn't. Ed looked at him for a long moment. That sounds like something a person says when they've figured out how to use fear rather than be used by it. Naruto glanced sideways. You're smarter than you act. I've found it easier to be underestimated, Ed said, with no particular emphasis, and went back to looking at the dark. The column moved on the second day, and the third, pushing steadily north along the milkwater. The land changed as they went, became more open, the forest thinning to scattered groves, the sky expanding overhead into a white-gray expanse that went on forever and felt like a ceiling pressing down rather than a sky lifting up. The cold intensified, not aggressively but steadily, the way water rises in a flood rather than crashing. On the third afternoon, they found the first new wights. Not attacking, stationed. Standing in the tree line off the western flank in a loose line, motionless, watching the column pass. 40, 50 of them, blue eyes tracking the march with that horrible patient attention. No aggression. No advance. Just watching. The column went tense. Hands on weapons, horses rolling their eyes and pulling at their bits. Mormont's command came immediately, steady, keep moving, don't engage, and Naruto seconded it silently by maintaining his own forward pace without deviation. They're counting us, Jon said quietly from beside him. Yes. How many does whatever's commanding them have? North of the wall. He'd been running the numbers since leaving Castle Black, cross-referencing what he'd sensed from the wall's top with the patterns he was reading in real time. Thousands. At minimum. Possibly tens of thousands. The ones I've encountered have been advance parties, scouts, bait. He watched the stationary wights in the tree line. The main force is ahead. And you can fight thousands. In my full mode, yes. Not indefinitely, but for long enough. He paused. The White Walkers are the priority. They're the command structure. Remove the Walkers and the Wights, he'd been thinking about this since the Weirwood. They don't necessarily stop. But they lose coordination. They become a physical problem rather than a tactical one, and a physical problem this column can manage. How many Walkers are there? I don't know yet. He looked at the stationary wights as they passed. The blue eyes tracked him specifically, he noticed, not the column, him. They knew him. More than the 4 I encountered the first night. Less than whatever the Night King's full command structure requires. He thought about the wound in the world, the vast cold concentration he'd been tracking. There's something about the Night King's position that I can't fully read from this distance. I need to be closer. Closer, Jon repeated, in the tone of someone cataloging a statement for later argument. Don't worry about it yet. The fist of the first men appeared on the afternoon of the 4th day. It rose from the flat landscape like a clenched hand thrust up through the earth, a great rounded hill of rock and ancient turf, steep sides, wide flat summit, the kind of natural fortress that made a military mind immediately understand why people had been using it for 10,000 years. The top gave a 360 view of the surrounding land for kilometers. The slopes were steep enough to make a charging enemy slow. The rock itself held heat better than open ground. It was a good position. It was also exactly where he'd expected the engagement to happen. They made camp on the fist's summit, experienced rangers deploying in the practice patterns of men who'd done this before, establishing a perimeter, setting fires, placing the horses at the center. The work had the efficiency of trained hands. Naruto moved through it, helping where he was useful, his Sage Mode expanding outward in a constant wide pulse, reading the landscape. The dead were converging. Not quickly. Not yet. They were in the forest on 3 sides, the white signatures appearing and multiplying like stars emerging after sunset, 1, 3, 10, 20, building steadily toward a number he was still calculating. The White Walker signatures were deeper in, behind the wights, colder and more ordered. He counted them as they came into range. 8. Then 12. Then 16 Walker signatures, spread wide in a command formation that would have impressed any military strategist. And behind them all, still distant, still north, the wound in the world. Closer than it had ever been. Moving south for the first time since he'd started tracking it. "Kurama," he said very quietly. "I see it," the fox said. "It's coming." Night fell fast up here, the way night fell in open country, sudden and total, the last gray light snapping off like a lantern going out. The fires on the Fist's summit became the only warm things in a world gone absolutely black, and in that blackness, from the forest's edge in every direction, the sound began. It started as near silence, a rhythmic displacement of snow, hundreds of feet moving without hesitation, without the small variations of living things negotiating terrain. Then it became audible as individual sounds merged into collective sound. Then it became the specific overwhelming noise of an army moving in the dark. 300 men stood on the Fist's summit and listened to it get closer. Naruto stood at the eastern edge of the perimeter, where the slope was least steep and where his Sage Mode read the largest concentration. Jon was to his left. Thorn, surprisingly, to his right. Mormont was behind them on his horse, the Lord Commander's face in firelight showing nothing but command. "How long?" Mormont asked. "Minutes," Naruto said. "Numbers?" He did the final count, confirming. 2,000 wights in the immediate engagement range. More behind. 16 White Walkers, command spread. And, he stopped. "And?" Mormont said. "The Night King is here." He looked north, where the wound in the world had moved from distant to immediate, a concentrated cold that was now close enough to feel physically, not just through Sage Mode. "This isn't a ranging force. This is a demonstration." "A demonstration of what?" Thorn said. "Numbers," Jon said, understanding first. "They're showing us numbers. Making us understand the scale. They want us frightened," Naruto said. "The walkers understand fear's tactical value. They've been using it for 8,000 years." He rolled his neck. "It won't work." The first wights came over the Fist's rim, not rushing but steady, the terrible patient tide of things that had nowhere else to be and nothing else to feel. Fire arrows went first from the Watch's archers, the burning points arcing down into the advancing line and catching, the wights igniting and falling, the ones behind them stepping over the burning bodies without deviation. Too many. Too many immediately. The Watch's line buckled in 3 places in the first 2 minutes, men falling back, the dead pushing up the slope in a sustained wave that individual courage and dragonglass daggers could slow but not stop. Shouting. The specific human sounds of fighting and fear and adrenaline, layered over the complete silence of the dead. Naruto had been waiting for the moment when full commitment became necessary rather than overwhelming, the moment where restraint stopped protecting his people and started costing them. That moment came when he saw a brother go down on the western rim, pulled over the edge by 3 wights, gone before anyone could reach him. He let Kurama in. The chakra came up in a rush that had nothing gradual about it, the Ninetales' power flooding through the seal in a golden tide, the marks appearing at his joints, the cloak manifesting as a blazing aura that lit the Fist's summit like a second sunrise. The temperature within 10 meters of him jumped 30 degrees in a second. 3 wights within arm's reach crumbled on contact with the heat's edge before he'd touched them. The watch fell back instinctively. The wights on the eastern rim stopped. Not from fear. They stopped because something in the Night King's direction of them shifted, the advance pausing, reassessing, processing this new variable the way it had processed him in the forest on his first night. Cold intelligence encountering hot uncertainty. He moved. In chakra mode he crossed the Fist's summit in 2 seconds, hit the western rim where the line had broken, and entered the white formation like a point into water. Not using techniques, not using jutsu, just his body and the chakra, because at this level of output the chakra itself was the weapon, every strike dissolving the wights it connected with in a burst of golden heat, every step creating a radius of warmth that disrupted the walker coordination. He cleared the western break-in under 30 seconds. 60 wights, maybe more, gone, unmade, the burning shapes scattered down the western slope. He turned. The eastern and northern rims were still pressing. He created 50 shadow clones, flooding the perimeter, each one blazing with the same golden light, and the fist's summit went from crisis to controlled in a span of time that left the watch's men standing in a ring of burning wights with their weapons in their hands and nothing left to fight. The forest went silent. In that silence, after the sounds of battle died and before whatever came next, Naruto stood at the fist's northern edge and looked out into the dark. They were still there. 2,000 wights at the forest edge, stopped. 16 White Walker signatures spread behind them. And there, at the center, finally close enough to read clearly, the Night King. He was visible. Actually visible, standing at the tree line's edge where the fire's light barely reached, tall and still and cold, armored in black ice, his face carrying the same ancient stillness that the weirwood carvings carried, except the weirwood carvings were made to evoke expression and this face simply was expression, the expression of absolute certainty, the face of a thing that had been doing what it did for 8,000 years and had never encountered a reason to stop. His eyes found Naruto across 300 meters of freezing dark. And Naruto felt it, not through Sage Mode, not through any technique, a direct, conscious attention touching his own like a physical pressure. The Night King was looking at him the way Kurama had looked at him in the early years, before trust. The way very old, very powerful things looked at the specific category of threat that wasn't power or violence but something harder to handle. Purpose. He's curious, Naruto said quietly. Jon was beside him. Jon had apparently followed him to the northern rim, because Jon was constitutionally incapable of letting Naruto do anything without being proximate to it. What? He's not afraid. He's not angry. He watched the Night King's stillness. He's curious. He's been watching this wall of ice and this watch and this world for 8,000 years and none of it has surprised him. And then I showed up and, he paused. I'm something new. That's not reassuring, Jon said. It's not meant to be reassuring. It's information. He looked at the Night King. Looked directly at him across the dark, the chakra cloak still up and burning, the golden light probably visible from kilometers away. He held the gaze, direct, unblinking, the gaze of a person with nothing to hide and nothing to fear and something specific to say. I see you. I know what you are. I'm coming to talk to you. The Night King held his gaze for 30 seconds. Then he raised one hand. The wights turned. The White Walkers retreated. In 30 seconds the forest was empty, 2,000 dead things dissolving back into the dark as completely as if they'd never been. Gone. The silence after was so total it had its own texture. He withdrew, Mormont said. He'd come forward, horse and all, was standing behind them looking at the empty forest. You looked at him and he withdrew. He withdrew to reconsider, Naruto corrected. Not to retreat. He let the chakra cloak down gradually, the golden light fading, the temperature dropping back. He saw what I am. He thought about how to explain this to people who didn't have the context. He's incorporating new information. The way you said the walkers did in the forest, Jon said. Faster, though. At a different scale. He turned back to the summit. Men were treating wounds, accounting for numbers. He could see from here that the losses were lower than they should have been, the first engagement after his training, the positioning on the fist, the perimeter fires. They'd survived contact with 2,000 wights and lost, he made himself count. 11 men. 11 was too many. 11 was always too many. But against those numbers, without him and against men who hadn't had those 2 weeks of training, 11 was a fraction of what it would have been. He found Mormont and gave the number before the Lord Commander could complete his own count. Mormont took it with the stillness of a commander absorbing losses, the internal discipline of a person who felt every name and showed you none of it. "We'll burn the fallen before dawn," Mormont said. "I won't leave anyone up here for them to use." "Good. We need to talk about what comes next." Mormont looked north. "We can't stay on the fist indefinitely. And marching back south means, not yet," Naruto said. Mormont looked at him. "The Night King is here. I need to be closer." He watched the Lord Commander's expression. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I need to do for this to mean something more than surviving one night on a hill. Sam's research, the Weirwood memory, what I've been reading since I arrived, it all points to something I can do when I'm close enough. But I need to be close enough. Close enough means, north. Further north." He looked at Jon. "Not the whole column. Just me and," he stopped. "Just me." Jon's expression said absolutely not. "Just me," Naruto repeated, looking at him directly. "If you're going north alone to confront the Night King," Jon said, very deliberately, "then you're doing it with at least one person next to you who can make sure the experience is properly reported back to Castle Black if it goes wrong." "It won't go wrong. Then you won't need me there and it's a wasted effort on my part." Jon held his gaze. "Which I'm willing to make." Naruto looked at him for a long moment. Looked at the set of his jaw, the quality of his stubbornness, the stubbornness of a person who had decided and was not going to be moved, not by logic, not by volume, not by any amount of practical argument. He recognized it because he wore it himself most days. "Fine," he said. "Thank you," Jon said. "Don't thank me. Keep up." Mormont looked between them with the expression of a man who has been in command for a long time and has learned that some decisions happen between people and are not his to make. "Dawn," he said. "You leave at dawn. The column holds the fist." He looked at Naruto. "If you're not back in 3 days, Naruto said. 3 days. Mormont's jaw tightened. "After which I'm coming north myself." "You won't need to." He looked at the old man, at the gray-bearded, dark-eyed, exhausted leader of 300 men standing on an ancient hill in the absolute dark of a world that had forgotten them. He felt something for Mormont that he hadn't entirely expected, not the sharp quick affection he felt for Jon or Sam, but something slower and more solid, the feeling of respect for a person who'd been carrying too much for too long and hadn't bent. "Get some sleep," he said. "All of you." He spent the remaining hours before dawn at the fist's northern edge, Sage Mode wide, tracking the Night King's movement. It went north, steady, deliberate, not retreating so much as creating distance. The white mass dispersed back into the forest but didn't go far. The White Walker signatures maintained their spread pattern, a command net hovering in the dark. Sam appeared beside him an hour before dawn, which was not where Sam was supposed to be but was somehow not surprising. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sam said. "About what you saw in the Weirwood. About what the hero did." Naruto waited. "The way you described it, showing the Night King something. Offering something." Sam sat down on the cold rock, pulled his cloak tighter. "I've been cross-referencing every record I have about the end of the long night, and there's one detail that keeps appearing across 3 different sources from 3 different cultures. Old Tongue, an early Undul manuscript, and a Dornish maester's transcription of an even older oral tradition." He looked up. "In all 3, the hero didn't fight the Night King in the traditional sense. What the records describe," he paused, gathering the exact words, "is that the hero gave the Night King his nature back. The night was very quiet." "His nature," Naruto said. "Whatever the Night King was before. Before the children made him into what he is." Sam's voice was careful, scholarly, but underneath the scholarship was a genuine weight, Sam feeling the significance of what he was saying. Whatever warmth, whatever person, was in there before they sealed him into cold, he stopped. The hero showed it to him. Made him feel it. And when the Night King felt it, the dead stopped, Naruto said. Yes. Because the dead aren't his army. Naruto looked north, where the wound in the world moved through the dark. They're his seal. The way Kurama was mine. Sam blinked. He's not commanding them, Naruto said slowly, the full shape of it assembling. He's sealed into them. Into the cold. Into the raising and moving of the dead. It's not what he wants, it's what was done to him. It's what he is now because someone made him that way and the nature compounded over 8,000 years. He felt Kurama go very still inside him. And because he can't break out of it himself, because the seal has been there too long, because the nature has become him, all he can do is express it. Keep raising the dead. Keep moving south. Because the alternative is what? Existing in that cold forever. He's doing what I did, Kurama said. Very quietly. For 1,000 years. Expressing the only nature he had left. Yeah, Naruto said. I don't fully follow the seal metaphor, Sam said carefully. But the outcome? I need to show him what he was. He looked at Sam. And to do that, to reach through 8,000 years of compounded nature and touch what's underneath, he looked at his hands, where the seal marks were visible even without the cloak active. I need to be inside the Bijuu chakra fully. Not chakra mode. Not combat mode. He paused. Full-tailed beast mode. Sam stared at him. It's the most powerful thing I can be, Naruto said. And it might be enough. And if it's not? He thought about this honestly. Then it wasn't. That's not a plan with a contingency. The contingency is that I'm also very good at fighting. He stood up, looking north. The sky was beginning, barely, to lighten, the gray not yet pink but moving in that direction. Sam. The research you've done, what you found tonight, he looked at him. That's the thing that makes this possible. Without you pulling that out of 3 different sources, I'd be walking into this with half the picture. Sam looked slightly overwhelmed. I read things. And thought about them. That's exactly as rare and valuable as hitting things hard, Naruto said. I mean that. Sam looked down at his boots. Looked up. Did the thing where he gathered himself into someone braver than his baseline. Bring Jon back, he said. He doesn't think I noticed how he was looking at you when you said you might go alone. He worries. He's been worrying his whole life and he's not as good at losing people as he acts. I know, Naruto said. Good. Sam stood up, tucking the books under his arm with the practiced ease of a man who carried books the way other men carried weapons. I'll have more research ready when you come back. When, Naruto noted. When, Sam confirmed, firmly. Dawn came in gray and cold and absolute. The column stirred on the fist's summit, fires rebuilt, horses fed, wounds checked, the 11 fallen burned with quiet ceremony in the darkness before first light because Mormont had kept his word. Naruto stood at the northern rim with a pack he'd assembled from the watch's supplies, dragonglass, because he'd learned from the weirwood that the physical form still mattered, provisions he probably wouldn't need but Jon definitely would, rope, fire-starting materials, and watched Jon Snow say goodbye to Ghost. The direwolf was not happy about staying. Ghost communicated this through the very clear body language of a highly intelligent animal who understood the situation better than most humans were comfortable with, pressed against Jon's side, head up, red eyes moving between Jon and North repeatedly. Jon spoke to him quietly, his hand on the wolf's great white head, the conversation entirely one-sided in words but clearly mutual in something else. Then Jon straightened and came to where Naruto was standing, his pack over his shoulder, Longclaw at his hip, his face carrying the prepared quality that Naruto had come to recognize as Jon's version of ready. Ready? Naruto asked. No, Jon said honestly. Let's go. They went north off the fist slope as the sun crept up behind the clouds, a pale suggestion of light rather than the thing itself, and the forest swallowed them in 20 steps. Naruto ran his Sage Mode outward and found the Night King's position immediately, 12 kilometers north-northwest, stationary now, as if waiting. 12 kilometers, he told Jon. Maybe 2 hours at walking pace. He's not moving. No. He looked north through the trees. He's waiting for us. Jon processed this. He knew you'd come. He's been watching us for weeks. He probably knew before I did. He started walking. How's your Westerosi theology? Do you have gods here that deal in fate? Jon glanced at him sideways. The 7. The old gods. He paused. Why? Just wondering if your world has a framework for absurdly improbable coincidences that were probably inevitable. Mine does. He thought of the Sage of Six Paths, of Kurama, of the specific sequence of accidents and choices that had made him what he was. Specifically for the idea that certain meetings are arranged by something or someone that was thinking very far ahead. Jon was quiet for a while. You think you were sent here? I think a sealing experiment went wrong in a world that produces a specific kind of person, he indicated himself. And that person ended up on the north side of the wall instead of safely in a desert in their own dimension. Whether that's coincidence or arrangement, he shrugged. Either way, I'm here. Either way, the Night King needs what I have. He paused. And I've learned not more actions right the next chapter now. Chapter 5, What the Cold remembers. The forest north of the fist was a different quality of silence than anything Naruto had walked through before. Not the silence of emptiness, the forest wasn't empty, his Sage Mode reading white signatures in loose patterns on both flanks, keeping pace, an escort rather than a threat. Not the silence of a place where nothing lived. Something more specific. The silence of a place where everything alive had learned to be very, very quiet. Even the wind had stopped. They'd been walking for 40 minutes, and Jon hadn't spoken since Naruto's sentence had trailed off at the fist. Not because there was nothing to say, Jon was constitutionally full of things to say, he just chose most of them not to, but because the forest was asking for silence the way deep water asked for stillness, and Jon Snow was good at reading what a situation asked for. Naruto appreciated that more than he could currently articulate. The wights are flanking us, Jon said finally. Quietly. Since we left the fist. He kept his pace steady. They're not going to engage. We're being walked in. Like guests. Like something, Naruto said. I'm not sure guests is the word. The trees thinned gradually over the next kilometer, not ending, just spacing apart, the canopy opening in increments until the gray sky reappeared overhead in widening patches. The ground changed from forest floor to something harder, older, rock showing through the thin soil and flat plains worn smooth by something that wasn't weather. Ancient stonework, maybe, the remnants of a structure so old that the forest had almost entirely reclaimed it, leaving only these flat patches and the occasional suggestion of a wall in the arrangement of the larger rocks. Then the trees ended entirely. The clearing was roughly circular and enormous, 300 meters across at least, the trees standing at its edge in a perfect ring as if they'd been told not to enter. Snow covered the ground in an even white plain broken only at the clearing's center, where something stood. A weirwood. Ancient beyond any weirwood Naruto had yet seen, the trunk so wide that 10 men linking hands couldn't have circled it, the bark not white but a pale silver gray that seemed to generate its own faint luminescence, the carved face larger than a doorway and worn by time until the features were almost abstracted, the screaming mouth become something that wasn't exactly screaming anymore. The red sap had frozen in tracks that ran the full height of the visible trunk in vertical lines, dark as old blood. And in front of the weirwood, absolutely still, stood the Night King. Naruto stopped at the clearing's edge. Jon stopped beside him. The Night King was taller than he'd looked from the fist's northern rim, 2 meters, perhaps more, the black ice armor adding to his silhouette rather than simply covering it. His face was pale as the weirwood bark, with the same quality of something that had been one thing for so long that the original thing was genuinely gone. Not hidden. Gone. Eyes that were blue in the way a glacier was blue, not a color so much as the visual expression of depth in cold and absolute time. He was looking at Naruto. Around the clearing's edge, wights stood in a silent ring. Naruto read them without fully looking, 200, perhaps more, absolute stillness, not the shambling restlessness they showed during active direction. Waiting. 8 white walkers stood in a spread formation between the wights and the Night King, for on each side, armored and still and cold. Their eyes moved from Naruto to Jon and back to Naruto with the operational attention of a command structure assessing variables. Okay, Jon said under his breath. This is a lot. Stay behind me, Naruto said. Not because you can't handle yourself. Because if I need to move fast I need to know exactly where you are. Jon moved half a step back and left. Not behind, beside, offset. Covering angle. The combat instinct of a trained fighter adapting a suggestion into something functional. Naruto walked into the clearing. The snow didn't crunch under his feet so much as compress, the cold up here having taken the moisture out of it until it was more powder than snow. His breath steamed. The temperature was something beyond cold, it had passed through the range where cold was a physical sensation and entered the range where it was simply a fact of existence, the ambient truth of the air. He stopped 10 meters from the Night King. The Night King's eyes were on him with the full weight of 8,000 years of patient attention. Not hostile, not welcoming. Entirely present. This was a being that had not been surprised in a very long time and was now, for the first time in longer than most civilizations had existed, surprised, or the closest thing to surprise that something so old and so sealed could manage. I know what you are, Naruto said. Not what you became. What you were before. The Night King didn't move. Didn't speak. The 8 walkers shifted fractionally, a collective micro-adjustment, the body language of a command structure receiving an unexpected input. Someone made you into this, Naruto continued. The children of the forest. They put something in you, sealed something cold and absolute into you, and that seal compounded over 8,000 years until the person underneath it was buried so deep that you probably can't feel them anymore. He watched the Night King's face. But they're there. The silence held for a long moment. Then the Night King spoke. It wasn't words, not any language Naruto had encountered or that his particular dimensional travel seemed to have given him access to. It was more fundamental than language. A sound that bypassed hearing and arrived directly in the chest, low and resonant and terrifyingly structured, with the quality of something that had been working out what it wanted to say for centuries and had finally found the moment to say it. Kurama translated. Not with words. The fox took the sound, the direct chest resonance of it, and held it up against his own vast and ancient experience of the world, and what came back to Naruto was not a translation so much as an understanding. An emotional truth rather than a semantic one. You cannot give back what is gone, was the closest thing to words. The cold is what I am. The cold is what exists. The living world is the disruption. The ending is the correction. I've heard that before, Naruto said quietly. Not from you specifically. But that logic, the idea that you are what you are completely, that the original self is gone, that the only purpose left is the one that was given to you by someone else's will. He felt the seal marks on his skin, not activating, just present, a reminder. I believed something similar once. About myself. About what I was. The Night King's eyes narrowed fractionally. 8,000 years of expression suppressed into something very small. I was sealed at birth with something that wanted to destroy everything, Naruto said. Not the same as you, I know that. The scale isn't the same. The origin isn't the same. But the structure, he held out his hand, palm up, not as a gesture of offering but of demonstration. Let a small pulse of Kurama's chakra light up in his palm, warm and gold, the color of autumn sunlight. I was told my whole life that this made me a monster. That the thing inside me made me only one thing. That I had no other nature. He closed his hand. And I had to fight for years, actually fight, against people and against the thing itself and against my own doubt, to find out that wasn't true. The weirwood behind the Night King pulsed. A wave of natural energy that wasn't from Naruto's Sage Mode, the tree itself, responding. The red sap in its frozen channels caught the pulse and brightened briefly, an internal glow in the dark lines of the carvings. The Night King turned his head toward it. A small movement. The first non-directed movement Naruto had seen from him, not tactical, not communicative. Reflexive. Something in him responding to something in the tree before he could process it. There, Kurama said. It remembers you, Naruto said. The tree. It was here before. It saw, he paused, pulling the weirwood memory from the Whitetree encounter, the deep weirwood communion in Castle Black's God's Wood. It saw what you were. Before. The Night King's attention came back to Naruto with a force that was almost physical, a focused cold pressure that hit him in the chest and didn't find what it was looking for because what it was looking for was someone it could make stop. He felt it probe and find the Kurama chakra and pull back from the heat of it, the way it had pulled back in the forest on his first night. You can't silence me, Naruto said. Not with cold. Not with the dead. I'm not, he paused, searching for what was true. I'm not your enemy. I never was. What's happening south of your wall is also not your enemy. It's your nature expressing itself in the only direction it knows because nobody has offered it a different direction. He took one step forward. I'm offering you a different direction. The White Walkers moved. All 8 of them, a simultaneous step forward, the armored cold of them pressing toward him in unison. The Night King raised one hand. They stopped. Just like that, one gesture and 8 ancient supernatural beings held their position like they'd been nailed to the ground. The authority of it was absolute and immediate, and in that authority was the thing Naruto had been looking for, not just command, but feeling. The Night King had stopped them because he wanted to hear more. Because something in what Naruto was saying was reaching past 8,000 years of accumulated cold and touching something. Kurama had gone completely still inside him. He's listening, the fox said. And then, very quietly, he's been waiting for someone to say this for a very long time. I know, Naruto murmured. Jon had not moved from his offset position. He was watching with the specific quality of his full attention, reading the Night King, reading Naruto, reading the walkers, the trained combat awareness running underneath the genuine human weight of witnessing something he didn't have a framework for. The Night King made the sound again. Deeper this time. More structured. Kurama processed it with the focus of someone listening to music they'd heard before in a different key. He says, the fox translated slowly, that there is no warmth left. That warmth was what was taken from him, not added, taken. The cold was not sealed in. The warmth was sealed out. And what was sealed out cannot come back because it has been outside for 8,000 years and the world has moved on without it. Naruto was quiet for a moment. The warmth wasn't sealed out, he said carefully. It was sealed away. There's a difference. Sealed out means gone. Sealed away means, he pressed his hand flat against his own chest. Still there. Just underneath everything that grew on top of it. He looked at the Night King directly. I know what that feels like. I carried rage in me for years that wasn't mine, that came from the thing sealed into me. And I thought it was me. I thought there was no line between me and the rage. He paused. The line was there the whole time. I just had to find it. The weirwood pulsed again, stronger this time, the glow in the sap channel staying rather than fading. The natural energy around the tree was doing something active, not passive, building in a way that Naruto's Sage Mode read as intentional. The tree was doing something. The Night King turned toward it again. Stood facing it. And then something happened that made Jon make a sound, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. The Night King raised his hand and pressed it flat against the weirwood's bark. The contact lasted 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds the temperature in the clearing rose 20 degrees. The snow on the ground within 15 meters of the weirwood softened, just slightly, the perfect white plain losing its perfection in a small radius around the tree. The Night King's hand against the pale bark, armored, ancient, cold, and the tree's glow moving through its channels toward the contact point. Then the hand came away. The Night King stood with his back to Naruto for 3 seconds. The walkers had gone completely still, not the operational stillness of entities waiting for orders but the empty stillness of things that had been rendered temporarily without input, their command structure momentarily somewhere else. When the Night King turned back, his face was the same. But his eyes were not. The blue was still there. The cold was still there. But something else was in the blue, not warmth, not the gold of the chakra, nothing so dramatic or simple. A crack. Something so small and old and barely there that only Naruto's Sage Mode detected it at all, a hairline fracture in 8,000 years of sealed certainty. The sound came again. Very quiet this time. Not yet, Kurama translated, and his voice was not the fox's dry rumble but something much more careful, much more present. He says, not yet. He says the cold is still what he is. But, a pause. But, he has not forgotten everything. The world held its breath. Then the Night King looked north. It was a dismissal, not hostile, not angry. A turning away that said, I have heard you. This conversation is over for now. The remaining question, what I do with what I've heard, is not yours to determine. The walkers turned. The wights turned. The whole vast, silent assembly of the dead rotating away from them and beginning to move north, back into the deeper forest, with that terrible quiet efficiency that was both impressive and awful. In 40 seconds the clearing was empty except for Naruto, Jon, and the ancient weirwood. Jon was beside him in 2 steps. What just happened? His voice was controlled but his hands weren't. He had Longclaw's grip in one fist without having drawn it, the combat reflex running its own course. What was that? At the end, what did he say? He said he hasn't forgotten everything, Naruto said. Jon stared at him. Is that good? I don't know yet. He looked at the weirwood. The glow in the sap channels was fading back to dark but hadn't fully gone, a residual warmth, like the embers after a fire. It means something got through. Whether it's enough, he shook his head. He's been this for 8,000 years, Jon. You don't undo that in one conversation. You don't even make a significant dent. He looked at the handprint on the bark where the Night King had pressed his palm, the slight impression, the faint warmth still coming off the contact point. But he listened. He touched the tree. He let himself feel something for 2 seconds. He paused. For a being that's been sealed in cold for 8,000 years, 2 seconds is a beginning? Jon said. Maybe. He looked at the handprint for a long moment. Then he turned away. Or maybe he goes home and raises 10,000 more wights and decides the conversation was a waste of time. He started walking south. That's the part one can't control. Jon fell into step beside him, adjusting to Naruto's pace without comment. They walked in silence for several minutes, the forest swallowing them again, the wights that had been flanking them on the walk-in now completely absent. You weren't afraid of him, Jon said finally. No. He commands an army of the dead. He can raise people just by looking at them. He's essentially unkillable by conventional. I've been afraid of things before, Naruto said. Genuinely afraid, the kind that shuts down thinking. I know what that feels like. He navigated around a cluster of black-barked trees without looking at them, Sage Mode guiding him automatically. He's not that. He's sad, Jon. He's the saddest thing I've ever encountered. 8,000 years of a nature that isn't yours, doing a thing you were made to do, unable to stop, unable to feel what you felt before, the whole world running from you because you're the thing running from yourself. He paused. Fear didn't feel like the right response to that. Jon was quiet for a while. The forest moved around them, birds somewhere, actual birds, which Naruto noted with Sage Mode because the presence of living things was notable up here, calling in the canopy. Your world must be, Jon started. Stopped. Started again. You talk about it sometimes. Your village. The war. Things you've been through. He looked sideways at Naruto. You've seen a lot of terrible things. Yes. And you still, the way you looked at him. The Night King. Like he deserved to be talked to. He paused. Where does that come from? Naruto thought about this honestly. Not the easy answer, the shinobi philosophy, the Hokage dream, the words he'd given speeches about. The actual, personal, true answer. When I was small, he said, every person in my village looked at me the way you'd look at a dead thing. With fear and distance and the particular cruelty of people who've decided you're dangerous before you've done anything to deserve it. He kept walking. I know what it's like to be something that people have decided about. And I promised myself a long time ago that I would never do that to anything else. He paused. Even if the thing in question is 8,000 years old and commands an army of the dead and has a very legitimate argument for why everything should stop moving. Jon walked with that for a while. Then, for what it's worth, he said carefully, I don't think anyone in Castle Black has decided about you. Thorn has, Naruto said. Thorn is changing his mind and finding it extremely uncomfortable. Naruto laughed. The sound went up through the black trees into the gray sky and dissolved there. Yeah, he said. I know. They made it back to the fist 2 hours before dark, cresting the slope to find Mormont waiting at the top with the controlled expression of a man who has been counting minutes. Sam was not at the summit, Sam was at the base of the fist's eastern slope, sitting in the snow with books, because Sam had found the only semi-sheltered spot on the entire hill and put his library in it. Naruto gave Mormont the full account while Jon stood beside him and Ghost pressed against Jon's leg hard enough to shift his balance, the direwolf's relief expressed in pure physical weight. Mormont listened to all of it, the clearing, the weirwood, the Night King's communication, the withdrawal, without interrupting, his face cycling through a series of controlled reactions that were more informative than full expressions would have been. When Naruto finished, Mormont was quiet for 30 seconds. He touched the tree, Mormont said. Yes. The Night King. He put his hand on a weirwood and stood there. 2 seconds. Another silence. And you believe this changes something? I believe it confirms something I suspected. He's not beyond reach. He looked at Mormont directly. Which changes the nature of this problem. If he can be reached, if there's something in there that can respond to what I showed him, then the solution isn't killing him. He paused. The solution requires me to go further than I went today. Further, Mormont said. The full Bijuu mode. What I showed you briefly on the fist, that was chakra mode. A layer below full transformation. He watched Mormont's face. In full transformation he stopped, deciding how to frame this for a man who had no reference framework for Bijuu, for tailed beasts, for the specific category of power that came from a human and a nine-tailed fox becoming one thing together. Larger, he said finally. Significantly larger. And the chakra output, the warmth, what the Night King's cold is responding to, is on a completely different scale. How much larger, Mormont said, with the tone of a man who suspected he didn't want to know. The size of a very large castle, roughly. He watched Mormont absorb this. I would need open ground. I can't do it in the forest. I can't do it on the fist, the structure of the hill would, he paused. I'd need open ground and I'd need the Night King in range. Mormont was very still for a long time. And, he said carefully, if you do this thing, if you reach him, if it works, what happens to the wights? If the Night King's seal breaks, if whatever was done to him 8,000 years ago comes undone, or even partially undone, his hold on the dead should weaken. He paused. Not immediately. Not all at once. But the coordination collapses first, the walkers lose their direction, the wights lose their direction. They become a physical problem rather than a tactical one. And the walkers themselves? He thought about this. I don't know. They were made the same way he was, they're extensions of his nature, in a sense. If his nature changes, he looked at Mormont. I genuinely don't know. I'm telling you honestly. Mormont nodded once. Processing. The Lord Commander walked to the fist's northern edge and stood looking out at the dark forest, the wind moving through his grey beard. The sun was going behind whatever passed for a horizon in this overcast sky, the light dropping off steadily. The column goes south, Mormont said, still facing north. Lord Commander, the column goes south at dawn, Mormont repeated. 300 men on an open hill are not a tactical asset for what you're describing. They're a liability. Something for the dead to use. He turned. You and I go north. No, Naruto said. Mormont looked at him. You go south with the column. Jon, he looked at Jon, who already had his expression arranged in a way that said he knew what was coming and was not accepting it. Jon goes south with the column. Naruto, Jon said. Sam has to go south regardless, I'm not arguing that. He looked at Jon. And you, don't, Jon said. Don't tell me to go south. Don't do the thing where you send everyone away to protect them and then do the dangerous thing alone. His voice was level but not quiet, the specific intensity of someone who had identified a pattern and was refusing to enable it. You talked to the Night King about how you pushed through things alone because nobody trusted you. And now this is different, how? How is this different? The summit was quiet except for the wind. Several of the watch's rangers had found reasons to be nearby, which meant the conversation had an audience of about 20 people pretending not to listen. Naruto looked at Jon. At the gray eyes that carried every hardship of Jon's life without using any of it as currency, not performing the weight, just living under it and continuing to function. He thought about what Sam had said, he's not as good at losing people as he acts. He thought about what it would cost him, if it were the other way around. Fine, he said. Jon's jaw unclenched fractionally. Thank you. If it goes wrong, then I'll be there to make sure it goes wrong in the most useful way possible, Jon said. Which is the best either of us can offer. Mormont looked between them with the expression he'd been wearing increasingly often in the past weeks, part exasperation, part something that, on a man with less control of his face, might have been affection. The column goes south at dawn, he said again. You too, he looked at Naruto, then Jon. 3 days. After which I'm turning the column around regardless of what the South thinks about it. He held Naruto's gaze. Don't waste what the watch is giving you. The night on the fist was quieter than the previous one, the dead had withdrawn north and the landscape had settled into that absolute winter silence. The fires burned. The watch kept their watches. Naruto sat with Sam while the stars came out through breaks in the cloud overhead, Sam's books open in his lap, lamplight catching the pages. The full transformation, Sam said. You're going to do it. Tomorrow or the day after. Depending on how far north the Night King holds. And when you do it, Sam looked at him. Will you know what you're doing? Will you be yourself? That's what everyone always wants to know, Naruto said. Not dismissively, it was a legitimate question. Yes. Completely. Full Bijuu mode is me and Kurama both, fully present, operating together. It's not possession. It's not losing control. He paused. It used to be dangerous, when Kurama and I were still fighting each other, the transformation would bring the rage up. But we're past that. You're sure? Completely, Kurama said in Naruto's chest, with a dryness that would have amused Sam greatly if he could hear it. He says yes, Naruto told Sam. Sam looked at the space next to Naruto's left ear where he'd learned, through observation, that Naruto's eyes went when he was listening to Kurama. I wish I could talk to him, Sam said. There are things I'd want to ask. About, being what he is. What it's like to be that old. What would you ask? Sam thought about it seriously, his brow furrowed. I'd ask if there's anything left that surprises him, he said finally. After all that time. After seeing everything. Whether the world can still, he gestured, unable to quite land the word. Whether it still does anything new. Naruto relayed this. Kurama was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that was distinctly less dry than usual, tell him yes. This world surprises me. A pause. He surprises me. The way he carries knowledge like it's the only weapon that matters. I've seen that before, in people who were alive for 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things. It always surprised me. Naruto told Sam. Sam's face did something complicated and genuine. He looked back at his books after a moment, and his hands were slightly less steady on the pages. Tell him I'm glad, he said quietly. The stars moved slowly overhead. The fire crackled. Around the fist, the watch slept in shifts, and the night held, and the dead stayed north. Naruto sat with Sam and the stars and the idea of what tomorrow might require of him. He let himself feel the full weight of it, not pushing it aside, not processing it into something tactical and manageable. Let it sit in him, heavy and real. The chance that it wouldn't work. The chance that 8,000 years was too much. The chance that the 2 seconds of warmth he'd seen in that clearing was the most the Night King had and it wasn't enough. It was enough, Kurama said. You're overthinking. I'm appropriately thinking. You're catastrophizing. He stopped. Thought about it. Maybe slightly catastrophizing. The Night King touched a weirwood tree because you told him it remembered what he was. The fox's voice was gentle and direct in equal measure. Do you know how many beings have tried to reach him? How many heroes in 8,000 years have gone north with weapons or fire or clever plans? A pause. None of them thought to talk to him first. That's either a point in my favor or evidence of how misguided I am. It's a point in your favor. Another pause, and then more quietly, I know what it is to be unreachable. I know what it costs. 8,000 years is long. But feeling, genuine feeling, not the simulated understanding of a tactical mind, feeling goes through time. It doesn't get stopped by it. Naruto looked at the stars. You're getting sentimental in your old age, he said. I'm 900 years old, Kurama said, with great dignity. I have earned sentimentality. Sam, who had fallen asleep over his book, stirred, muttered something scholarly in his sleep about dragonglass deposits, and settled again. Naruto adjusted the book so it wouldn't slide off his lap and stood up carefully, not waking him. Jon was on the northern watch. Naruto found him at the fist's upper rim, Longclaw's hilt visible at his shoulder, ghost materialized from nowhere and standing beside him. The direwolf's white bulk in the darkness was its own light source, almost. He stood beside Jon without announcing anything. Jon moved slightly to make room. Ghost glanced at Naruto with the red eyes that seemed to see further than anyone else's, and then looked back north. What are you thinking about? Naruto asked. My father, Jon said. A pause. And whether the people who arrested him understand what's happening up here. Whether the war in the south, whether any of it, makes sense when you're standing here looking at this. It doesn't make sense, Naruto said. Wars fought over chairs never do. Not when you put them next to something that actually threatens everyone equally. He looked north. But people fight over chairs anyway. Because the chair is visible and the threat is up here and invisible to anyone who hasn't stood on this wall. If we could show them, Jon said. If we could, he stopped, frustrated. We're going to show them, Naruto said. Not with a letter. Not with a raven. What happens here, What happens when the full Bijuu mode goes north and meets whatever's coming? He paused. People are going to feel that. Even in the south. Jon looked at him. How big did you say? Size of a large castle, roughly. Jon looked north again. And that, what you'll be, in that form, still me. He said it firmly, because it was important, because it was the thing that mattered more than the power or the size or any of the rest of it. Always still me. Jon nodded once. Absorbed it. They stood together in the dark for a while, the cold pressing from the north and neither of them giving any ground to it. Ghost sat between them like a white anchor. Somewhere in the deep forest, far north, the wound in the world held its position and its 8,000-year patience, and somewhere inside that patience, barely there, hairline thin, surviving on almost nothing, a warmth that had been sealed out was remembering that it existed. 2 seconds. The Night King's hand on a weirwood tree. Tomorrow? Jon asked. Tomorrow, Naruto confirmed. He went to sleep 2 hours before dawn and woke 5 minutes before it, Kurama's internal clock more reliable than any rooster. The column was already breaking camp in the controlled efficiency of men who'd been told what they were doing and were doing it, packs assembled, horses bridled, supply wagons turned south. The Lord Commander moved through the preparation with the quiet authority of a man who had made his decision and was not revisiting it. Mormont found Naruto at the edge of the preparations. When this is over, Mormont said, without preamble, if it works, if the dead stop, the South will still be at war. The Iron Throne will still be contested. The world will still be exactly as broken as it is. I know, Naruto said. I'm saying, don't go home after. Mormont held his gaze. Whatever home means for you. Don't go immediately. He paused. Chose his next words with care. The Watch needs, the realm needs, someone who's seen this. Who can speak to it? He paused again. Who can make people believe it's real? Naruto looked at him for a long moment. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, gray-bearded and iron-spined, standing on an ancient hill in a world that had forgotten the men who guarded its northern edge, asking him to stay. I'm not going anywhere, Naruto said. I don't know how to get home. And even if I did, he looked north. I'm not done here. Mormont's face did the thing that wasn't quite a smile, more pronounced than usual this time. He put his hand on Naruto's shoulder, brief, firm, the gesture of a man not given to gestures. Good luck, he said. I don't need luck, Naruto said. I know. Mormont turned to his horse. I'm offering it anyway. The column went south. The Watch moving back through the forest toward the wall, the sounds of their departure fading quickly in the absolute sound absorption of the haunted forest, until there was nothing left of them but the tracks in the snow. Naruto stood on the fist with Jon and Ghost and everything that was about to happen. Jon was looking south at the empty snow where 300 men had been. His face was doing the thing it did when he was choosing not to show something, the jaw set, the eyes forward. Ready? Naruto asked. Jon turned north. The same answer as before the clearing. No. Let's go. But before they moved, Naruto went to the fist's northern edge one more time. Looked out at the landscape. Extended his Sage Mode to its absolute limit, pushing further than he'd pushed it in this world, further even than the deep weirwood communion, this a raw horizontal reach rather than a rooted vertical one, burning through his reserves faster but reaching further. He found the Night King. Still north. Maybe 15 kilometers now, not 12, he'd moved slightly deeper in the night. Still stationary. Still waiting. And around him the assembled dead, vast and patient, the cold of their collective presence a pressure even at this range. But something was different from last night. The wound in the world was, not smaller. Not warmer. But slightly less certain. The absolute cold of it had an irregularity that hadn't been there before, the way a perfectly frozen lake has an irregularity when the first hairline crack appears. The ice was intact. The cold was intact. But the crack was there. The weirwood, Kurama said. Yeah, Naruto said. 2 seconds had been enough to do that. He let the Sage Mode come down, stopped burning reserves, and turned to Jon. 15 kilometers, he said. We move fast. When we get close enough, he looked at his hands. You'll know it when it starts. The transformation. Yes. When it starts, get clear. Not because you're in danger from me, never that. But the scale changes and I need the space. He looked at Jon directly. And Jon. Whatever happens. Whatever you see. Whatever comes out of it. He held Jon's gaze. I'm coming back. Jon held the gaze. Something crossed his face, not the controlled competence of the trained fighter, not the weight of everything he carried, but something younger and more honest. The expression of someone choosing to believe a thing because it's the right thing to choose. I know, he said. They went north. The forest took them in cold and dark and the deep silence of a place waiting for something it had been waiting for a very long time. Chapter 6, One Punch for the Living. They heard the dead before they saw them. The sound was different from the fist, not the advancing wave of 2,000 wights pushing through forest, not the directional assault of something aimed at a specific point. This was omnidirectional. A vast, low displacement of the world, the sound of the ground itself conducting the weight of an army that didn't breathe or speak or shift impatiently, that simply stood in the dark in numbers too large to hold in a single thought. Naruto kept walking. 12 kilometers became 10. The forest thinned again, the same gradual spacing apart of trees that had preceded the weirwood clearing, the sky opening overhead. The natural energy up here was doing something he'd been tracking since the fist, condensing, pooling, as if the land itself was bracing. The Sage Mode drank it in automatically, and he let it, building the reserves he was going to need without rushing the process. 10 kilometers became 7. The wights appeared at 5, not charging, not circling. Standing. A line of them stretching east and west as far as his Sage Mode reached, standing at the tree lean with that absolute stillness, blue eyes forward, waiting. Behind them more lines. Behind those more still. Layer after layer receding into the dark like the world had just become dead things as far as it went. Jon stopped beside him at the edge of the last trees. Looked at the wall of the dead and said nothing, because there was nothing that added to what the sight was already saying. How many, he said finally. Not a question so much as a person making themselves confront a number. I stopped counting at 8,000, Naruto said. The actual number is higher. Jon exhaled slowly. And the walkers? 22. Spread wide, behind the white lines, command formation. He looked further north, to where the cold concentrated itself into a point of such intensity that even standing here, 7 kilometers south of it, the air tasted of nothing but winter. Night King is at the center. Directly north, maybe 4 kilometers behind the front line. He's not coming to us. He's waiting to see what I do. He looked at the wall of the dead. This is his answer to the clearing. I showed him one thing yesterday. He's showing me one thing today. He paused. Numbers. The argument that numbers make when words don't work. Is it working? Jon asked. No, Naruto said simply. He stepped out of the tree lean. The wights didn't move. The line held, stationary, 1,000 blue lights in the dark. He walked across the open ground toward them with a steady pace, hands at his sides, Sage Mode pulling in the condensed natural energy in long deep draws. Jon kept pace slightly behind and left, Ghost moving low and silent beside him, the direwolf's white coat the brightest thing in the landscape. 50 meters from the white line, Naruto stopped. He stood in the open ground between the forest and the dead and looked north, past the lines, to where the Night King stood at the center of his vast assembly. He couldn't see him with his eyes. He didn't need to. The Sage Mode read him clearly, that ancient cold presence, absolutely still, absolutely aware, watching Naruto across the assembled dead with the focused attention it had brought to everything since the clearing. Naruto raised his voice. "You showed me numbers," he called out. The sound carried perfectly in the dead silent cold, every dead thing absorbing it without response. "I understand what you're saying. I understand the argument." He paused. "But numbers don't change what I came to tell you. And they don't change what I'm about to do." Silence. "You touched the tree," he said. "You felt something in those 2 seconds. I know you did. And I know it cost you something to feel it, something you've been sealed away from for 8,000 years, and the seal doesn't give ground without it hurting." He looked at the blue eyes of the nearest wight, the dead light behind them, the absence of any original person. "These people you're wearing, these dead things, they were someone. Every single one of them. They had names and they were afraid and they didn't want this." His voice stayed level. "You know that. Somewhere in you, the thing that got sealed away knows that." A pause. "Because it was a person once too." The wind came from the north, a long, sustained, pushing wind that pressed against him and found nothing yielding in him. The Night King raised his hand. The white lines moved forward. Not charging. Walking. Steady, methodical, the grinding advance of something that had no urgency because it had no sense of time, the pace of an inevitable thing rather than an aggressive one. 8,000 dead things beginning to close the 50 meters between the line and the 2 living people standing in the open. Naruto exhaled through his nose. "Kurama," he said. "Ready," the fox said. And then, with the directness of someone who has something important to say and is saying it clearly, "Whatever happens today, I want you to know that what we are together is the most interesting thing I have ever been part of. In 900 years. All of it. Don't get sentimental on me now. I'm not getting sentimental. I'm being accurate." A pause, warm and dry. "Now let's show this old frozen bastard what fire looks like." Naruto closed his eyes. He'd done this before. Twice in the 4th Great Ninja War, the full-tailed beast mode transformation, the complete merging of his own chakra nature and Kurama's into a single operating form. He knew the process. He knew what it cost, the massive chakra expenditure of maintaining the transformation, the specific quality of awareness that came with it, not loss of self, never that, but expansion. The sense of being larger in every dimension, not just physically but perceptually, the world suddenly coming in at a scale that matched the form. He found the seal's center, found where Kurama's presence began inside him, and instead of taking from it or borrowing against it, he did the thing that had taken years to learn how to do, he opened toward it. Not pulling. Not pushing. Just removing the distinction between them, the boundary that normally kept their energies separate operating as complementary rather than merged. Kurama came forward. The golden light started at his hands. Jon took 2 steps back without being told, the trained fighter's recognition of a changing battlefield geometry, Ghost pressing low beside him. The light moved up Naruto's arms and hit his chest and spread, the seal marks appearing across his skin in black lines, the chakra cloak building in intensity until it stopped being a cloak and started being something else entirely. The white stopped. Not directed, the directive from the Night King hadn't changed. They stopped because something in them, some remnant of animal instinct that persisted even through the cold and the raising, recognized what was happening as categorically outside the range of things they had been built to walk toward. The transformation came in a vertical rush. One moment Naruto Uzumaki was standing in the snow, 17 years old, orange jacket, whisker marks, entirely himself. The next moment he was none of those things individually because he was all of them simultaneously at a scale that made the distinction meaningless. The Bijuu mode took shape around him, not like armor, not like a shell, but like something that had always been this size and had simply been folded down for the convenience of fitting through doors. The Nine-Tails fox, constructed of golden chakra so dense it had texture and weight, 9 tails manifesting behind him in slow arcs of burning orange-gold light, each one 30 meters long and trailing heat that melted the snow in a wide radius. The face of the fox was Kurama's face, vast and ancient and blazing with an intelligence that was 899 years of existence given visible form. But behind that face, and in the eyes that looked out through it, was also Naruto, the same blue eyes, the same quality of attention, the same absolute refusal to be anyone's enemy unless they forced the categorization. The heat came off the transformation in waves that rolled south through the forest and north across the dead, melting snow in a spreading circle of several hundred meters. The natural energy of the entire landscape rushed toward the form like water rushing toward a drain, filling the transformation with a sustained Sage Mode amplification that built the output still further. The world lit up gold. Jon, behind and to the left, stared up at the form with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. Ghost had gone completely still, not frightened, not aggressive. Awestruck, in the specific way that very intelligent animals went still in the presence of something that categorically exceeded their frameworks. The white lines broke. Not in the forward direction, they broke backward, the compulsion of the Night King's command running up against something it couldn't override, the animal instinct of the original bodies the wights were screaming louder than the cold direction they received. The front lines fell back into the ones behind them, the formation collapsing in cascading confusion, the edges of the army where the heat was hitting hardest starting to show actual deterioration, the cold animating force withdrawing from the outermost wights as the warmth of the chakra pushed the temperature past the range their animation could sustain. Wights at the outer edges stopped moving. Not burning. Just stopping. The blue lights in their eyes going out, the bodies settling into stillness, the raising undone by proximity to something that was the categorical opposite of what had raised them. The Bijuu mode form turned north. Naruto looked for the Night King through the form's perception, vast and clear and amplified by the Sage Mode embedded in the transformation, and found him, 3 kilometers north, standing between his retreating lines with something he hadn't shown before. Stillness that was different from his normal stillness. This was not the stillness of patience or command or absolute certainty. This was the stillness of a thing that has encountered the specific circumstance it has been both dreading and waiting for. He knew. The Night King knew exactly what this was. Move, Kurama said. Not urgently. With focused intent. The Bijuu form moved north. One step and the ground shook, not from violence but from presence, from the simple fact of something this large operating in a space not designed for it. The white lines parted, not by command but by physical displacement, the dead things flowing away from the advancing form the way water flows from a moving ship. White walkers scattered from the approach path, not fighting, not yet, moving with the sharp tactical responsiveness of a command structure reacting to an existential threat to its center. 2 kilometers. 1. The Night King stood his ground. Of course he did. 8,000 years and he had never run from anything. He stood in the open tundra as the Bijuu mode form closed the distance, the black ice armor and the ancient pale face and those blue eyes looking up at something that was 40 meters tall and burning with the full cooperative power of a human and a 9-tailed fox who had decided together that this was the moment. Naruto stopped 30 meters from him. The heat of the transformation hit the Night King like a wall, not fire, not an attack, just the sheer ambient warmth of the form existing in close proximity. Naruto watched it connect. Watched the Night King's armor begin to show microfractures at the surface, the black ice destabilizing in the warmth. Watched the Night King's face absorb this with the specific quality of a being encountering something it was constitutionally vulnerable to. And watched him hold his ground anyway. There it is, Kurama said. Very quietly. That stubbornness. That's what was in him before. That was the person. The White Walkers were moving, spreading outward, flanking, the command structure trying to get attack angles on something that didn't have a conventional weak point. Ice spears forming, the same ice weapons he'd encountered on his first night, now at 22 times the quantity. They came in a coordinated volley from 3 sides, each spear the size of a small tree, aimed with the precision of 8,000 years of practiced cold. He let them come. The impact across the Bijuu form's exterior was like hail on stone. Rael felt the cold of them trying to propagate into the chakra construct and finding the warmth already there, the two forces meeting in bursts of steam where spear met chakra. None of them made it through. He barely moved. The Night King watched this. Then he raised both hands. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 3 seconds. Not ambient cold, directed cold, the Night King reaching into whatever his nature had access to and pulling it outward in a concentrated expenditure that was, by any measure, the most powerful single display of the cold force Naruto had felt since arriving in this world. The air crystallized. Snow reversed direction and went up. The ground cracked in spreading patterns from the Night King's feet. The cold hit the Bijuu mode's exterior and the two forces met. It was not a small collision. The ground heaved between them, a shockwave of conflicting energies propagating outward, the warmth and the cold hitting their boundary and both pushing, the air between them becoming something that wasn't temperature so much as force. Wights at the collision's radius stopped moving entirely, caught between the two expressions and unable to sustain either direction. Naruto planted the Bijuu form's feet, the tails spreading wide for balance, and pushed back. Not with violence. Not with a strike or a technique. Just with presence, with the full output of the transformation directed outward in a sustained wave of warmth that was the Nine-Tails chakra and his own chakra and the natural energy of the entire haunted forest all flowing through one point and expressing itself as heat and light and the specific quality of something that was alive and was going to stay that way. The Night King took one step back. One step. 8,000 years of never retreating, and this was one step backward, the black ice armor fracturing further, the pale face showing something, the first thing, that looked like it was costing him effort. Like this was not comfortable. Naruto spoke through the form. The voice was his and Kurama's simultaneously, resonant and huge and warm, carrying across the landscape and into the dead and into the cold and directly, precisely, at the ancient being standing in it. I know you're in there, he said. The person. I know you can feel this right now. Not my power, the warmth. The thing that was sealed away from you. He pushed the warmth outward, steady and sustained, not a burst but a continuous expression. This is what you felt when you touched the tree. What you felt for 2 seconds in that clearing. I'm giving you more than 2 seconds. The Night King's eyes were on him. The blue in them was changing, not the irises, not the color, but the quality of the light, the dead cold illumination cycling through something. Like a light flickering before it goes out, except the opposite, like a light that went out a very long time ago, flickering before it comes back. Now, Kurama said. The seal is loosening. Right now. He went deeper into the Bijuu form than he'd ever gone, past the outer layer of the transformation, past the combat capabilities and the physical power and the warmth radius, into the center of it where he and Kurama were most completely one thing, where the boundary between human and fox was most fully dissolved. Where what they had built together, the trust, the partnership, the specific hard-won thing that had taken years of conflict to become, was most purely itself. He showed it to the Night King. Not as a technique. Not as a weapon or a display or a demonstration of power. Just showed it. The way you show someone something true about yourself when you believe they can understand it. The warmth and the cooperation and the years of two very different beings choosing each other, choosing to work together rather than fight, choosing trust in a situation where distrust would have been so much easier and so much more natural. Two beings who had been made into each other's enemies becoming something else entirely. The Night King went absolutely still. Then he raised his face to the gold light of the Bijuu form and closed his eyes. The silence that fell across the battlefield was not the silence of battle paused or command suspended. It was the silence of 8,000 things simultaneously losing the directive that was animating them, the cold compulsion withdrawing from 22 White Walkers and 8,000 Wights in a single instant, not because they were destroyed but because the source of their direction had gone somewhere else, turned inward, found something it had sealed away and was, for the first time in 8,000 years, feeling it. Wights stopped moving. White walkers stood like statues, the operational intelligence gone from their eyes, not dead, not alive, simply suspended. The silence lasted 15 seconds. Then the Night King opened his eyes. The blue was still there. But the dead cold light was gone from it. What replaced it was not warmth, not the golden warmth of the chakra, not any dramatic transformation. Just eyes. Old and tired and carrying the weight of 8,000 years of a nature that wasn't theirs, but eyes that were, for the first time, seeing rather than commanding. He looked at the Bijuu form for a long moment. Then he looked at the wights. His wights. The dead he'd raised across centuries, the accumulated armament of a nature he'd been sealed into. Looked at them with eyes that could see them clearly for the first time. He made a sound. Not the deep chest resonance of command. Not the communication Kurama had translated in the clearing. Something smaller and less structured than that, something that wasn't directed at anything, that was just coming out of him, that had the specific quality of sounds that people make when something that has been locked inside them for a very long time is finally allowed to move. Kurama said nothing. He didn't need to translate this one. The Night King raised both hands again. Not toward the Bijuu form. Toward the White Army. The 8,000 dead things that had been his army collapsed. Not dramatically, not a great falling or a shattering or a flash of fire. They just went. The blue lights in their eyes extinguished simultaneously, the animating cold withdrawing from all of them in a single breath, the bodies dropping into the snow as the raised things they'd been for however long they'd been raised. Wights falling in their thousands across the landscape, the snow absorbing the impact of each one, the silence of the collapse somehow louder than sound. The White Walkers crumbled. One after another, in quick succession from the outermost to the innermost, the beings the children of the forest had made dissolving back into the cold they'd been constructed from, not dramatically, not with violence, just becoming again the frost and ice of the landscape as the will sustaining them withdrew. In 30 seconds, the battlefield was empty. 8,000 dead things and 22 White Walkers, gone. The Night King stood alone in the open tundra, his armor fracturing steadily in the ambient warmth of the Bijuu form, the black ice falling away in pieces to the snow, revealing underneath it something that wasn't armor at all, just a man. Old beyond old, pale beyond pale, wearing the physical marks of 8,000 years of cold nature, but a man. The architecture of a person, underneath everything that had been done to it. Naruto began to let the Bijuu form down. The process of withdrawing was slower than going in, the natural energy releasing back into the landscape gradually, the golden light fading in stages, the vast form condensing, the tails retracting, until Naruto was standing in the snow in his orange jacket with the chakra down to ambient levels and the cold of the actual world pressing in from every side. He stood 40 meters from the Night King. They looked at each other, the same as the clearing, same distance, same quality of direct attention, but with everything between then and now making it a completely different thing. The Night King looked exhausted. It was the only word for it, a tiredness that went so deep it had passed beyond physical and become something existential, the tiredness of something that had been operating against its own nature for 8,000 years and had just, for one long moment, stopped. He made the sound again. Quiet. Directed this time, at Naruto. Kurama translated without being asked. Enough, the fox said. Simply that. He says enough. Naruto exhaled. Looked at the Night King, at the old tired man standing in the snow where 8,000 wights had just been. Yeah, he said quietly. Enough. Movement to his right. Jon Snow had been following the Bijuu form at a distance, keeping pace with a determined stubbornness that Naruto had registered even through the transformation. He was there now, 50 meters back, watching with Ghost sitting tight against his leg, both of them very still. Naruto looked between Jon and the Night King. He's not done, he said, to both of them and neither of them specifically. Whatever this is, it's a pause, not an ending. The cold is still in him. The nature is still there. It's 8,000 years old and 2 seconds of a weirwood tree and one Bijuu mode doesn't undo that completely. He kept his eyes on the Night King. But it's a beginning. The Night King looked north. He turned and walked north without haste, without drama, without any of the terrible patient certainty of his earlier movement. He walked like a very old, very tired person walking home, and the landscape absorbed him, gradually, the pale figure moving into the grey-white north until the distance took him and the Sage Mode faded his presence to a whisper. The wound in the world was still there. Still cold. But different. Like a wound that had been cleaned rather than ignored. Still a wound. But pointed towards something other than festering. Naruto stood in the snow and let his Sage Mode read the landscape for a full 2 minutes, thorough, comprehensive, checking every corner of the horizon. No white signatures. No walker signatures. The natural energy of the haunted forest, which had been condensing and pooling and bracing for days, was releasing slowly, expanding back into the landscape, the trees and the snow and the dead cold air all exhaling something they'd been holding. Then he turned south and walked back to Jon. Jon was standing exactly where he'd been, Longclaw still sheathed, he'd never drawn it, ghost pressed against his side. He watched Naruto close the distance with the expression of a person who has witnessed something that doesn't fit any framework he has and is not trying to force it into one. "What just happened?" Jon said. "Specifically." "I showed him something true," Naruto said. "And it was enough." He stopped, facing Jon. "For now." "For now," Jon repeated. "He's still out there." "Yes." "The cold is still, yes." He held Jon's gaze. "I told you it wasn't an ending. It's a beginning. The crack I saw in the weirwood vision, it's wider now. Significantly wider." He paused. "But cracks don't undo 8,000 years of structure overnight. What we bought today is time. Real time. Years, maybe. And what we do with those years," Jon looked south, toward the wall, toward Castle Black, toward the realm beyond it and its wars and its thrones and its thousand varieties of human failure and human courage. "What do we do with those years?" "We make them ready," Naruto said. "For whatever the next chapter of this looks like." He started walking south. "Come on. We need to get back before Mormont turns the column around." "You told him 3 days." "I told him 3 days because I was being optimistic." He looked sideways. "We managed it in 1. Jon fell into step beside him, Ghost moving easily ahead through the snow, the direwolf's white form catching what little light the gray sky offered. "You said it's a beginning," Jon said, after they'd been walking a while. "Yes. The Night King might come back. Might decide the crack isn't worth pursuing. Might just, he won't." Naruto was quiet for a moment, finding the right words. "I've seen this before. Not the same, the scale is different, the form is different, the history is completely different. But the moment when something that's been locked into a nature it was given against its will encounters an actual alternative," he looked at his hands. "That doesn't unhappen. You can't unfeel that." He thought of Kurama in the early years, of Gaara in the sand, of Pain in the rain. Whatever he does from here, whatever the cold makes him do, or whatever the exhaustion of 8,000 years leads him back to, he's going to carry what he felt today. It's going to be in him. Jon walked with this. "And that's enough?" he asked finally. "It's a start," Naruto said. "Which is what I work with." They were silent for a while, the forest moving around them, the sound of their feet in the snow and Ghost's lighter steps and the distant calling of birds that had returned to the haunted forest now that its held breath had been released. The natural energy coming back into the landscape in gentle pulses, filling the spaces the cold had kept empty. "What happens when you go home?" Jon asked. Quietly, with the care of someone asking a question that costs something to ask. "I don't know if I can go home," Naruto said honestly. Jon glanced at him. "The sealing array that brought me here, I don't understand it well enough to reverse it. And there's no one in this world who does." He paused. "Sam's working on it." In between the White Walker research and the Dragonglass research and the extensive bibliography he's accumulating on every other crisis in this world simultaneously. He looked at the tree lean. But even if we figure it out, I don't know if I go immediately. He paused again. There are things here that aren't finished. Jon was quiet. The South, Naruto said. The war. The people who don't believe the wall is real and the men who guard it. He looked north briefly, then south. Dragons. Jon looked at him sideways. You want to meet the dragons. I want to meet the person who has them. Who's building something from nothing across a sea that's treated her like an obstacle. He thought about what Eamon had told him, the old maester's careful words about his great-great-niece and the thing she was attempting. Someone who grew up with nothing, who was told she was nothing, who kept going anyway and built something that the world keeps trying to take from her. He paused. I know that story. Jon was quiet for a moment. She'll come for the Iron Throne. Maybe. But she'll need to deal with what's north of the wall eventually. Everyone will. He looked at Jon. And when that conversation happens, it would be useful to have someone in the room who's already dealt with it. Jon held his gaze. Something in his expression did the thing it did when he was arriving at a conclusion he'd been working toward for a while. You're planning to stay. I'm planning to be useful, Naruto said. Staying is a consequence of that. They came out of the thinning forest into the open ground south of the engagement site, the landscape widening, the sky lifting. The wall was visible on the southern horizon, the faint line of white and gray that meant 700 feet of ancient ice standing between two definitions of the world. Naruto looked at it from this angle. From the north side, which was where he'd first seen it, which was where it had first registered as real. From up here you could see its full extent better than from Castle Black's yard, the way it curved very slightly to follow the land's contour, the way it caught the flat winter light and threw it in all directions, the way it rose out of the world with that quality of permanence that was both reassuring and slightly terrible. 8,000 years old. Built after the long night as a barrier, a reminder, a massive architectural statement, this far and no further. He thought about what Sam's research had uncovered. The Night King made by the children, the weapon that got out of control, the hero with fire inside him. 8,000 years of the wall holding a pause rather than solving a problem. And now, a crack. Real and growing. A wound that had been cleaned. The wall had served its purpose. But its purpose might be different now than what the people who built it had intended. Jon, he said. The wall. Jon looked at him. Then at the wall. Then back at Naruto with the expression of someone who can see where this is going and is not entirely sure how he feels about it. What about it? It was built to hold the Night King south. Yes. The Night King is north of it. Yes. A pause. What are you, if the Night King comes south again, if the crack isn't enough, if the years we bought aren't used well, if whoever sits on the Iron Throne while we're doing this decides the wall's problems are still just stories, he looked at the wall. The barrier isn't the answer anymore. It never was, really. You said it yourself, it goes from sea to sea and they can go around the ends eventually. He paused. And there's something else. There's something else, Jon repeated, in the tone of someone bracing. The wall is also sealing in the Night King's influence. The cold he's radiating, the animating force that raises the dead, it pools north of the wall because the wall disrupts it the same way it disrupts everything else. If the Night King is in the process of changing, he watched the wall on the horizon. If what happened today is actually working, if the crack is real, the wall might be slowing the process. Keeping the cold concentrated up here rather than letting it dissipate. Jon stared at him for a very long time. You're going to say you want to bring it down. Not the whole thing. Not right now. Strategically. He looked at Jon. There's a point on the eastern end where the wall's magical reinforcement is weakest, I've been reading it since my second day here. The ice is thicker there, but the animating principle, the old magic that was put into the construction, it thins toward the eastern shore. He paused. If I hit that specific point in full Bijuu mode, the structural integrity of that section fails. A section comes down. Enough to let the cold cycle through rather than pool. And if the Night King changes his mind, Jon said carefully. If he decides to come south after all. If bringing down part of the wall means his army can, we fight them. He said it simply. But Jon, we were always going to fight them. The wall was buying time. I bought time a different way today. The question is what we do with it. He looked at Jon. If the Night King is changing, if there's a real person in there who's going to spend the next years fighting his own nature and maybe, eventually, winning, I don't want the wall between us and that process. I don't want the cold concentrating up here, pooling, pressing. I want it to breathe. Jon was quiet for a long time. Mormont won't agree to this, he said finally. Mormont will understand it when I explain it. He looked at Jon. You understand it. Jon looked at the wall. At the vast white sweep of it on the horizon. 8,000 years old. The symbol and substance of everything the Night's Watch stood for, everything the North meant, the physical fact of a world's attempt to hold a problem at arm's length. I understand it, Jon said slowly. I don't know if he stopped. This is the thing you've been building toward. Since the first night on the wall. I didn't know it was what I was building toward, Naruto said. Not until the weirwood. Not until Sam's research. He paused. But yeah. I think so. Jon was quiet for the rest of the walk. They reached the wall 3 hours before dark, the gate tunnel admitting them with its usual assault of cold stone smell, the south side opening into the castle backyard. The column had arrived before them, Mormont having pushed the pace south, and the yard was full of black-cloaked men at various stages of unpacking from a march, the controlled exhaustion of people who'd been moving under weight and were now stopping. Mormont was at the yard center. He saw them come through the gate and his expression, which had been managing the controlled worry of a man counting down 3 days that hadn't been needed, shifted into something that was relief before it was anything else. He covered the relief quickly. But Naruto had seen it. Report, Mormont said. The White Army is gone, Naruto said. 8,000 and whatever the number was above that. The White Walkers are gone. The Night King withdrew north. He paused. He's not finished. The cold isn't finished. But there's a real crack in it and it's going to widen. Mormont looked at him steadily. You're certain? Yes. How? I showed him something he'd forgotten, Naruto said. Something that was sealed away from him and had been sealed away so long he'd stopped believing it was there. He met Mormont's eyes. He remembered it. And when he remembered it, the army went with the thing that had been raising them. Around the yard, men who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. The silence was the specific kind that happened when the thing people had been holding their breath about resolved in the direction they'd been afraid to hope for. Mormont was very still. Then he said, how long? Years. If we use them well. Years, Mormont repeated. And let himself, for just a moment, breathe. Sam appeared from somewhere in the crowd with 3 books under one arm and an expression of such intense intellectual hunger that Naruto almost laughed. I need to know everything, Sam said. In sequential order. Every detail. I want to write it down while, Sam, Jon said. After food, Naruto said. I'm very hungry. You're always hungry, Ed observed, from somewhere behind Sam. I just transformed into a 40-meter fox, Naruto said. The caloric expenditure is significant. Dolorous Ed looked at him with the expression of someone who had added this information to a list that was well beyond capacity. Right, he said. The kitchen won't be happy. The kitchen is never happy, Naruto said. That's not my fault. The evening that followed was not a celebration, the Night's Watch was too tired and too experienced and too aware of what years required to spend them on celebrations. But it was something. The fires were higher than usual. The food was better than usual, partly because Mormont had quietly authorized the better stores and partly because Naruto had, on the walk back from the feast the previous day, taken a 30-minute detour to deal with what turned out to be a very large elk that had been unfortunate enough to cross his path. Sam sat with Naruto for 2 hours after the meal, writing everything down in the cramped neat hand that already covered thousands of pages of research, asking questions, cross-referencing, building the record that he was building because Sam understood instinctively that events not written down had a way of becoming myths, and myths had a way of becoming misunderstood, and misunderstanding was how you ended up 8,000 years later with an army of the dead at your gate. Maester Eamon, who had been told the outline of events before dinner, sat in his tower and was quiet for a long time, and then sent a raven south with a letter that Naruto had helped him draft, addressed not to the Iron Throne, which wouldn't listen, and not to any lord with a war to fight, but to a specific destination across the narrow sea, carried in the specific careful language of an old man writing to someone he'd never met but whose grandfather he had known. A beginning. Jon found Naruto on top of the wall later that night. Not surprising. They'd both ended up here often enough that it had become a thing with its own logic. When the events of the day were too large for the inside of a building, the top of the wall was the place to process them. The cold was serious and the dark was absolute, and the height made the world feel both larger and simpler than it did at ground level. Ghost was there, because Ghost was always there when both of them were. "You're going to do it," Jon said, without preamble. "The wall." "Not tonight," Naruto said. "When the time is right. When Mormont understands the full reasoning. When Sam has documented it well enough that people south of here will understand what happened and why." He paused. "Not as destruction. As, the next step." Jon stood beside him looking north. The landscape below the wall's north face was dark and still, the haunted forest a black mass against a slightly less black sky, the stars visible in long strings between the clouds. "It'll be remarkable," Jon said quietly. "To watch." "It'll be loud," Naruto said. Jon was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me something about your home. Something real. Not the wars or the techniques." He paused. "Something small." Naruto thought about it. The wall was very quiet. The cold pressed from the north in its familiar way and he let it press without resistance, feeling the shape of it, the familiar thing it had become in the weeks since he'd landed on the wrong side of it. "There's a ramen shop," he said. "A small one, in the center of my village. Old man Tucci runs it, he's been running it since before I was born. He has a daughter, Ayam, who knows exactly which bowl is your usual before you sit down." He paused. "I've eaten there more times than I can count. Before missions, after missions, when things were good and when things were very bad." He looked at the stars. "It smells like warm broth and it's always slightly too hot in there from the steam and the old man never stops talking." He paused. "That's the thing I miss most. Not the power or the people or even," he stopped. "That specific smell. And knowing that when you sit down, someone knows what you need before you ask." Jon listened to this. Ghost pressed against Naruto's side. "You'll go back," Jon said. "Not a question. A declaration, the specific firmness of someone deciding a thing is true because it should be." "Yeah," Naruto said. "Someday. And until then." He looked out at the dark north. At the landscape that had almost killed him his first night here and had become, over weeks of cold mornings and bad food and black-cloaked men slowly trusting him and a dire wolf that had appointed itself his shadow, his, somehow. His to stand watch over. His to fight for. Until then, he said, this. Below the wall, in Castle Black's small god's wood, the heart tree's sap channels glowed faintly. Sam's lamp burned in the library window. Mormont's fire burned in his office. The watch settled into its night, and the ravens in the rookery shifted on their perches, and the horses stamped in the stable, and 300 men in black cloaks went about the ancient unglamorous business of existing in the cold and holding the line and trusting that what they were doing mattered. From the north, very faint and very far, the wound in the world pulsed once with its old cold certainty. And then, just barely, just for a moment that Naruto's Sage Mode barely caught, it pulsed back with something else. Something warmer. He didn't say anything about it. He just stood on top of the world's oldest wall in the cold and the dark, with a dire wolf at his side and the best friend he'd made in another dimension standing 2 feet to his left, and let the feeling sit in him, quiet and sure and exactly the right size. Not victory. Not an ending. A beginning. The best kind.